Welcome to the second episode of my Yakuza retrospective. In order to get the best possible experience, I recommend watching the previous episode on Yakuza 1 first, though it is not required to do so in order to enjoy this video. My goal with this series is to cover every localized entry in release order. I'm not against doing episodes on the non-officially localized titles with fan translations, as at the time of writing this, the main story of the first PSP game has a fan translation, and next month in January 2022, a fan group will be releasing their translation for the second game. Kenzan and Ishin do have English guides available, but at the moment I'm not entirely sure if it's worth doing that, as it would be infinitely more work using an English guide on a Japanese import. In this video, we'll be covering the original release of Yakuza 2 for the PlayStation 2, along with its remake Kiwami 2 when differences arise between the two. This video will be spoiling the entirety of the first two games, so if you have any intention of playing either of them, I implore you to do that first. Where we left off at the end of the previous episode, Yakuza 1 was a slam dunk and set Japan on fire. Everybody's hard work has paid off, and Yakuza 1 is on its way to becoming a household name and one of the pillars of Sega. But this didn't satisfy Kikuchi. He knew that a game's popularity could be short-lived, and if the series wasn't pumping out new installments to stay in the public's consciousness, it would fade into obscurity. He announced to Nagoshi that they were going to release a sequel in 10 months. Nagoshi understandably thought this was insane and completely unrealistic to do. They just poured their blood, sweat, and tears into getting the first game out, butting their heads with Sony at every corner initially just to get the game approved, and then back at home, they were constantly being told that the game was going to fail from Sega's management and their co-workers. Nagoshi taking the biggest gamble of his life, putting his job on the line just to make the game. The thought of making a sequel never crossed anyone's mind. In his own words in the behind-the-scenes book Destiny of a Dragon, he and the team were running on fumes at this point. With the insight to the working conditions of most game studios now, it is very easy to paint the picture of what it was like to make this game, working ungodly hours, crunching like there was no tomorrow, all to get Yakuza 1 out the door. And Kikuchi wanted to make the game 1.5 times the size of the first one, because they thought that players wouldn't accept the same thing a second time. This meant they had to make the game even bigger than the first one in less than 10 months because they had to have the game actually finished and have its gold master of the game done before then. That meant that they had to plan everything, make everything, cast all the new roles, record all the dialogue, put the game together, bug test it, and have it all approved by the SEC before its December 7th release date. While Nagoshi was completely against the idea, Kikuchi told him one thing.
This fire we've kindled will go out with surprising ease. If we don't do it next year, there's no point.
Kikuchi originally was the only person who believed in Nagoshi's vision and stood by his ideas fighting to get this game made. That sentiment really resonated with Nagoshi and decided that before we say making this in 10 months is impossible, let's figure out a way to get it done in that time. Like how they formulated the three-man team system when making the story of Yakuza 1, Nagoshi and Kikuchi came up with the parallel progress approach when making Yakuza 2. Instead of making the game in a standard linear fashion of doing one thing and then once it was done moving on to the next part, everything was going to be broken up into teams and worked on simultaneously. This meant the cutscenes, camera movement, animations, lighting, and all the music were being made at the same time. Nagoshi, Kikuchi, and Yokoyama had their work cut out for them because they had to make sure that everything was planned out and coming together perfectly all at the same time. If anything became unsynced, that would lead to more setbacks, which they could not afford. The Destiny of a Dragon notes that the atmosphere within the development team was different this time around. Understandably and unfortunately, the atmosphere during the first game's development was tense. Nagoshi remarked in the 10th anniversary book that there were those who came to him in tears and frustration. The pressure was immense and people quit because of it. But now, there was an air of pride within the team. They proved everyone wrong. They released what would go on to be a classic. Spirits were high, having a massive success under their belt after years of disappointment from Sega struggling after exiting the console arm race. Having Sega Sega and those around them have their back and believing in their vision, saying things like, "This game is amazing, it was fun," motivated them to make this deadline. Even with the many struggles ahead of them, Nagoshi said,
"If our suffering allows this game to be made, so be it."
Like we covered at the beginning and end of the previous episode, Yakuza 1 had a interesting localization.
Motherfucker, you take us for some bitches? Hey, kill this dumb motherfucker!
Between punching up the dialogue to include more swearing than in the original text, and some head-scratching decisions between what was changed to be familiar to Western audiences and what would be kept. The name changes established in the first game, like Shintaro Kazama being Shintaro Fuma, are still present. The first game couldn't include dual audio due to the limitations of the PlayStation 2, which actually had quite a lot of pushback according to localization producer Kevin Frayne. This led Yakuza 2 to not having a dub and only having English subtitles accompanying the original Japanese audio. Sega remarks how this actually went over better with fans at the time, citing that they were told having the original audio lent to having a more authentic experience. In reality, Sega was also probably happy that they didn't have to pay more voice actors because it is cheaper to just translate the subtitles instead of translating the subtitles and having to record all the audio in other languages, along with every other pain in the ass facet of dubbing. This, however, makes disconnects from the subtitles and the voice acted dialogue very obvious and hard to ignore. Like how most characters refer to Kiryu as Kazuma in the text, despite the fact that you could hear them call him Kiryu. The same thing with Sayama and Kazama, and many other smaller details. With the loss of the English dub, that does mean we unfortunately will no longer get raw as hell lines like,
"Bring that shit, Kazuma!"
I did not get the chance to talk about it in the first video since all we have access to is an English dub, but the Japanese cast of Yakuza is perfect. It's one of those casts where the people playing their roles feel like the only person who could ever do it. Anyone else would feel wrong. Takeya Kuroda is Kiryu. He breathes life into this character with his godlike performance throughout the entire franchise. I could not imagine anyone else doing it justice if they tried. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime type castings. Our opening finds us following a man sneaking out the back of a club to get to a building in the alley behind it. Inside, our ears are greeted to some hilariously bad royalty-free scream sound effects that everybody and their dog has. Rounding the corner is a man being gunned down by none other than Shintaro Kazama. Besides the fact that he's still alive here, you can tell what we are viewing must be very old, seeing as his hair is not gray and he could walk around perfectly fine. The man he shot gives him a warning in Korean before Kazama marches deeper into the building. The camera's guide rushes over to aid the shot man. With his dying breath, he asks this stranger to save his wife and child on the floor above. By the time he reaches them, the building is ablaze and the woman is about to jump out the window to her and her baby's death. Thankfully, the man is able to stop her and tells her that her child is innocent and she shouldn't throw away their life when he can help them escape. After fading back in from black, we jump forward more than 20 years. This man is Jiro Kawara, one of our key players in this tale. In Kiwami 2, he's modeled after his actor Susumu Terajima. I'm somewhat conflicted on this change, but we'll get more into that once we become more acquainted with Kawara later in the story. Besides being more than 20 years from the events we just witnessed, it's been 1 year since the events of the first game. Kamurocho is in an even worse state than it was last year. Now that the Tojo has been weakened due to the many betrayals, deaths, and over half of the clan being sent to the ER by Kiryu, their grip on Kamurocho has begun to slip. And in said openings, gangs, both local and foreign, have tried to wiggle their way in to take over some of that power vacuum. Kashiwagi has since taken over the Kazama family and now has an office at the top of the Millennium Tower, but little does he know a few floors below him is a man plotting to get his revenge for the killing of his comrades more than 20 years ago. Now jumping to Kiryu, he's suffering from a nightmare. The events of the first game clearly still weigh heavily on him. It's understandable that in the heat of the moment with his father figure dying in his arms that he was able to forgive him for killing his real parents, which set him, Nishiki, and Yumi on their paths of hardship and eventual deaths. But after the adrenaline stops pumping and he has some time to contextualize all this, it turns out it's harder than he expected to move on from these revelations. Since the events of last year, Kiryu has managed to finally live a clean and honest life with Haruka. We're never explicitly told what he does. In fact, Sega kept it a secret even when asked in this terrible interview where the interviewers wasted the developers' times with pointless bullshit that no one actually cares about, like more info on the female character Date talks to for a minute at the very beginning of the game and then is never in the game again and only functions to inform the audience what Date's been doing since the end of the first game. Today's the day that Kiryu and Haruka are going to visit everyone's graves. This functions as a recap for the first game for those who need a refresher or didn't play it. It was a very smart move to make this a completely optional thing because it would have been a massive waste of time for returning players after getting their hands on the controller for 2 seconds following a 20-minute opening cutscene. Kiryu and Haruka's morning is interrupted by the Tojo's 5th chairman, Terada, coming to Kiryu for help and advice. He wants to create a peace treaty between the Tojo and the Omi to avoid more pointless fighting before an all-out war breaks out, which would likely lead to the Tojo's defeat. This conversation is cut short as Terada is shot by Omi assassins. Fighting these guys functions as this game's tutorial, and I am so happy to say that they fixed every issue surrounding the first game's combat. Besides making the game grander in scale than the first one, Nagoshi and his team's top priority was acting on the constructive criticisms given to them about the first game's combat. Their success results in one of the most fun combat systems on the PlayStation 2. It still has its goofy moments at times, but the training wheels have come off with the combat being sped up, making it nearly twice as fast as the original. Here is a side-by-side of the full rush combo at its max level at the end of Yakuza 1, and here is the same rush combo at the start of Yakuza 2. The biggest issue of the first game, being unable to change directions when you start a combo, has been rectified. They made the intelligent move of starting you with the Komaki reversal, which you were only able to get in the first game more than halfway through it. It was also really slow in Yakuza 1, leading to the reversal attacks being interrupted by enemies, resulting in you getting styled on. Here, it is far faster and you could do it at any point in a combo as long as you're not holding R1. The lock-on is also far better in this game, with barely any instances of locking on to random shit in the environment or nothing at all. More games need to be like this, where they just leave you with a bunch of unlocks from the previous game instead of having to get them all over again. Please, Capcom, I do not want to have to unlock Stinger again for the 30th time whenever you make DMC 6. Ideally, Yakuza 2 could have left you with all the heat moves unlocked instead of having to get those back again. But what we have here with your full rush combo, Komaki reversal, and good dash distance is better than nothing. Speaking of dashes, let's see Kiwami 2's dash.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Buckle in, kids, this is going to be a long one. So similar to Kiwami 1 using Yakuza 0 as its base, Kiwami 2 uses Yakuza 6 as its base, to its detriment. I will say now that I do like Yakuza 6, but it is by far the worst game mechanically in the series, and pretty much all of its issues were carried over to this game. Its biggest being its leveling system, which is by far the worst I've ever encountered. It makes me vibrate with anger just thinking about how in some sick turn of events, this terrible leveling system was not in 1, but 2 games. How it works is you have 5 orbs of different colors, each pertaining to a different aspect of gameplay, that being strength, agility, spirit, technique, and charm. Instead of having the 3 trees of body, soul, technique that the original 3 games had, your upgrades are spread out among 4 menus: stats, battle skills, heat actions, and life skills. Stats, like the name implies, are all based around numbers: your HP, your damage, your defense, and how large your heat gauge is. I hate this because it is all bloat. Just filler crap to dump obscene amounts of points into, just so you can see your stat diamond grow in size until all 4 points say S. It's shit and just makes you feel weak for most of the game. You deal piss poor damage at the start because of this. Battle skills are the moves you'd normally learn from the technique tree. This includes stuff like the triangle charge attacks, parry, re-guard, increase combo speed, increase your throw strength, and so on. For some reason, they decided that more is better, so a ton of these moves have multiple upgrades you have to get before they're even usable. Like, your dodge is fucking terrible until you get the second distance upgrade, where it finally doesn't feel like a bob and weave right out of God hand. And even then, it still feels off at times due to the lag between when you hit dodge and when it actually happens, and the long recovery frames. This lackluster feeling is even further exacerbated when on uneven ground like the sloped streets heading to Purgatory. The only way you make any use of the dodge pre-getting any upgrades is simply preemptively dodging before people attack you. You just have to mash it out and then hope that while you're mashing dodge, they happen to swing at you so the animation has already started and you end up dodging them. All these clips that I'm showing right here on screen were me accidentally dodging because I was just preemptively mashing, and not the fact that I was reacting to them, which is what dodging should be in my opinion. Listen, the Yakuza 2 leveling system wasn't perfect. Gaining levels is far too centered around using weapons until they break, unlike the first game where doing heat moves on bosses will give you tons of levels. You can only see what you're going to unlock in the very next level instead of being able to see the entire tree so you know what you want to focus on first. Heat moves were locked way too deep into the soul tree and should have been given to you at the start of the game. But it also got around the bloat of this game's leveling system by bundling multiple things together. It also did not needlessly make things that should have been unlocked from the start upgrades. Why the fuck do you have to buy 5 sprint upgrades so you can traverse the city at not a snail's pace? Kiryu's base movement speed is him taking a brisk stroll through Kamurocho as he occasionally checks his watch. Why did it take them multiple games to implement infinite sprinting? Why wasn't this a feature when they implemented sprint for the first time? In Kiwami 2's defense, this was an issue that predates its existence, but it's still bullshit that it took as long as it did for this issue to be rectified. The heat action tab is just focused around heat moves, how much damage they do, and some other stuff you unlock later in the game. The final menu is in contention for the worst offender of this system. I really hate the stat upgrades, but life skills could easily be argued to be far more damning. This contains all the upgrades that are not combat focused, along with a few passive combat changes like spawning the golden boys and increasing the item drop rates from fights. The biggest non-combat upgrades are things like how much XP you gain for each colored orb, increase the XP for the few minigames introduced in this game that have their own separate progression system, and how big your hunger meter is plus the rate of digestion. So to recap, Kiwami 2's upgrade system is all based around these orbs and numbers, which ideally is going to push you to do everything the game has to offer, but anyone who has played this game or Yakuza 6 can tell you that isn't the reality and doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter what you do, because if you want to make any actual headway in the progression system, then you need to play the game in the most boring and unfun way possible. Combat encounters give you fuck all, and same for most of the sub-stories, and only near the end of the game that the main story actually starts to reward you decently. Some of the later upgrades cost obscene amounts of orbs, so to get everything, you'll need tens of thousands of these fucking marbles. If you watch or read any guide to leveling in both of these games, all of them are focused around eating.
It's the biggest diabetic move in the history of diabetes.
Foods at restaurants are the best source of gaining as much points as possible since they alone give you tons of all 5 orbs, and if you buy certain combinations, you get even more. The most popular level guide on YouTube, which shout out to it and all the other guides I used for this video, which I'll be linking in the description below, have you run in a triangle on this street in Sotembori, going from 3 shops, buying the same shit every time, and then drinking a digestion drink so your stomach is no longer full. Doing this takes fucking hours. You are better off just downloading a cheat engine table and giving yourself infinite orbs. That's what I did, because I did this method for an hour and was nowhere near finishing. I had all the money I would need to do this, but the time sink is just unfucking real, especially at the start when you don't have the max hunger meter and XP gains. The final level of both of these is really expensive, so at first you have to work towards getting these in order to speed up the progress, meaning that you're going to lose on your investments. And I've already played this game when it came out, so I have fully experienced just how fucking bad the grind is. Even after I had everything maxed out and all the abilities unlocked, I still never felt strong due to how terrible the feedback is in this game. That is simply something that cannot be conveyed through watching this video. A lot of my issues with the combat come from game feel, because they decided to make a game that looks cool, the combat looks awesome. Watching back my footage, I go, damn, this looks really stylish, and then I remember just how bad it felt to actually play. I seriously hate this game's combat. I think it's only beaten out by Yakuza 6 and how bad it is, because Yakuza 6's combat is just a worse version of this game's. I hate the physics of the Dragon Engine. It just makes you feel like you're fighting in a fucking bounce house. You and your enemies can be flung at any moment, like you're on a goddamn slip and slide. It's funny when you see a clip of it while browsing social media, but having this happen to you constantly in gameplay gets really fucking annoying. I have simply too many clips of this happening to actually include all of them in the video. This sentence is blatantly just an extension so I could show some of the funniest ones that I don't want to end up on the cutting room floor. Throws and the circle button combo finishers are basically unusable terrible in this game due to the physics engine. When you grab someone and try to throw them, if their body collides with anything, Kiryu will just drop them to the ground and deal 0 damage. Hell, in one case, I threw somebody, and while they were flying through the air, they were hit by something, which made the game think they were interrupted and resulted in dealing 0 damage. One of the pillars of the rock, paper, scissors triangle is just unusable if you aren't in wide open areas, and even then you can be stopped by random invisible walls or anything else the game decides is interrupting your throw. The circle button combo enders are the coolest thing about the original 2 games' combat. Breaking dudes' backs over your shoulders and sending them flying is my favorite thing to do in the game, but you're just fucking yourself over if you ever try to use it. Even if we ignore the shitty physics of the game, some of the throw animations just take fucking forever, which ends up leaving you wide open to being attacked or having someone run up on you and interrupting your throw, which completely negates any damage it would have done. The game also has a habit of making damage take forever to apply, which just adds even further disconnect to the already bad feeling combat, which somehow makes it feel even worse. Throwing aside, the combat just feels bad. Kiryu switches between feeling incredibly stiff and lumbering for some animations, like turning around, then he suddenly feels light as a feather and isn't affected by gravity as soon as you tilt the stick, and Kiryu bolts off into whatever direction you're facing. Most of the time, it feels like you're trapped in the gravitational pull of enemies when near whoever the game decides to prioritize, which still makes the dash feel fucking bad even after getting all the upgrades. Heat moves take up so much of your bar that it feels like the focus is put towards the burst mode. I will give credit where it's due because the combat does some things right that are worth mentioning. Storing weapons at any time when pushing down on the D-pad is very convenient. Having 3 shortcuts is also very much appreciated. Heat builds super fast in this game, especially compared to the original, which is my only real complaint with it. In Yakuza 2, your square attack rush combo punches barely filled anything of your heat gauge, especially compared to Yakuza 1 where the same rush combo could fill the entire thing. Only your triangle combo enders fill up a good amount, but the heat gauge, like the leveling system, has a massive bias towards weapons, where most weapons fill your entire heat meter in 2 to 3 hits, even when it's fully leveled. This makes the arena really annoying in later stages against some of the super tough enemies and ends up requiring you to play in a super defensive way so you could build up heat without getting bodied. That basically covers everything I have to say about the combat. There are still a few things left to mention, but those require later contexts of the story to delve into, so let's check back in with our story after completing the combat tutorial. Of course, Kiryu makes easy work of these assassins, but another one runs out from behind the tombstones and takes aim at Kiryu. Terada jumps in front of the bullet and the assassin runs off after Kiryu shoots back at him. Fatally wounded Terada gives Kiryu a blood-soaked letter saying that it's now up to him. He has to save the Tojo, bring this to Chairman Goda of the Omi Alliance, and bring peace between the East and the West. By the time the ambulance arrives, it's sadly too late as he bleeds out before ever reaching the hospital. Haruka says it's okay and that she'll stay at the orphanage for a bit while Kiryu goes and sorts things out. With the 5th chairman now dead, Yayoi Dojima has taken over as interim chairwoman. The Tojo officers are split between the idea of a peace treaty. Some aren't too keen on becoming buddy-buddy with the people who just killed their leader. This scene further shows the damage left by the events of last year, as the room is only filled with a few officers compared to how every seat was filled not too long ago. The Tojo really is on its last legs. They can't afford a war now. Kiryu, despite wanting to be free of this lifestyle, does feel partially responsible as he and Nishiki were closer than blood brothers, so anything he did will lay on Kiryu to set right. Yayoi takes this declaration as his dying wish, as there is a good chance he will be killed on this mission. Kiryu does have one more addendum to his request before he leaves. He knows that if anyone is going to help rebuild the Tojo and take place as its new leader would be none other than Daigo Dojima, Yayoi's son. Yayoi is disheartened to say that he is not the man that Kiryu once knew. He's no longer the raw, charismatic guy who doesn't back down to threats and authority like he used to be. After thinking Kiryu killed his father for 10 years, he went off the deep end and spent 5 years in prison, and after recently getting out, he spends his nights getting wasted in Kamurocho with his gang. We finally set our foot into town, and my god do I love how this game looks. When there is inclement weather in the original 2 games, it is just the best vibe. It's the perfect shade of gray and blue with shimmering lens flares of neon signs. It's just mwah, it's immaculate. For as much shit as I talk about the Dragon Engine's combat, these games are gorgeous. It was seriously impressive walking down Kamurocho for the first time when this game came out. There is unfortunately one slight issue with Kiwami 2's visuals, a very green issue. For some reason, in certain areas of the game, there is a very aggressive green filter. It makes the game look so bad. I don't know how a game flip-flops from being one of the best looking games on the market to a game that contains all of the worst aspects of modern video game visuals from the last 2 generations. There is also what looks like a layer of dirt on the lens of the camera in some places. I'm starting to think it might be the game incorrectly projecting shadows of some kind, because it's like characters having an aura of filth around them like they're Pigpen in the Peanuts, or like the backgrounds have a gradient styled texture to them similar to shows like Chpater. You could say that the clips I'm showing right now are really nitpicky or cherry picked, but it's honestly everywhere. Anytime there's movement in rooms, especially those without things covering the walls, it's hard not to notice things textured with this weird filth and seeing it shift around in the backgrounds with the camera's movement. Thankfully, there is a mod to remove the terrible green filter. While this mod is very impressive and improves a plethora of scenes, especially the ones that are excessively green, like the open world in Chapter 1 and 10 or the cutscenes in Chapter 4, and I mean no disrespect to whoever made this because it must have taken a lot of work, I do think it does conflict with some of the game's general art direction in places. Harsh shadows to highlight contrast plays a major role in this game's aesthetic, and also to mask some of the lower quality blurry texture work found in this game. So in removing this filter, it ends up making the game look way brighter than it was meant to be, and ends up making the game look worse in my opinion. Even without the mod, you could find areas without these harsh shadows and see how bad the game can look, like the photography minigame. It seriously looks like someone dumped Kiryu's model into Gary's mod and posed him with a camera. Here is the same cutscene side by side with and without the filter. Filterless makes it look like it's daytime with how well the characters are lit. If there is some way to remove this filter and keep the same brightness levels and harsh shadows, this would be a mod that I would unquestionably recommend, instead of as it is now, where I'm still recommending it, but there's a few caveats to think about in the back of your mind. After going around town talking to people and saving a hostess from some punks in the theater square, we have finally found Daigo getting blasted in Shine. Making quick work of his pussy posse, it's time to wake him up to the state of the Tojo and how badly they need him, even if that requires beating the shit out of him to see. I love this scene because with this being the first time meeting Daigo in person after getting such a terrible impression of him from talking to people in town, his struggle is a lot more nuanced. The line that really hits hard is where he tells Kiryu, "You are my fucking hero, man." Beyond the cast of the first game, we can see how even more people have been affected by Kiryu's decision to take the fall for Nishiki's actions 11 years ago in a way that doesn't feel cheap. There's a really hard balance to strike when introducing new characters in a sequel when they were never brought up in the first entry of a story. Tons of times it feels really shoehorned in, like, oh wow, this character was present during all the events of the first game, but conveniently was off screen and never mentioned in any context at all ever? I also really like Kiryu's response to Daigo. I like how he doesn't even try to refute any of the criticisms Daigo has. In fact, he agrees with him and shows that he's right, and that's why the Tojo needs him the most now, because he is the only one who sees it as it is and can bring it back to the former glory. Daigo agrees, but on one condition. He's coming with us to Kansai. He's got a score to settle with a man named Ryuji Goda, who is the reason that Daigo has spent his last 5 years in jail. We finally arrived at the new area introduced in this game, Sotenbori. Based off of real life's Dotonbori, it's a dual strip town split down the middle by the Sotenbori River. Compared to Kamurocho, it's about half its size, I want to say, maybe a little less. With the way the town is formed and the fixed camera angles of this game, it really masks the fact that this city is not as big as Kamurocho, yet it still conveys the same grand scale that Kamurocho gives. Daigo decides he's going to go straight to the hotel and leaves us to roam the town alone. This is where the game starts to open up with side content. We don't have full access to the town yet, but we can still find plenty of things to do to keep ourselves occupied. Yakuza 2 actually added a decent amount of things to its open world side content that actually gives reasons to do it rather than just fucking around. Like for example, you can get an extension to your heat gauge if you win a tournament in VF6, watch specific VHS tapes, get a massage without falling asleep, confirming that post-nut clarity does in fact make you stronger. Certain VHS tapes and books can give you new moves. You can now befriend NPCs in the overworld, and if you get into a fight near them, they'll give you an assist heat move. But Kiwami 2's shitty leveling system strikes again, because instead of giving you all the assist moves and anything you learn from VHS tapes and books, you have to pay for each and every one of them after you already do their 30-second sub-story. Hooray! Thank you, Kiwami 2. I'm really glad you added this extra layer of bloat for no reason. On one hand, I do really like the idea that there are tangible rewards for exploring the world. On the other, it does feel like it's kind of random for some of these things, and definitely requires you to have a guide to get all the heat upgrades and do some of these sub-stories. Massive shout out to Hero XXXG's Game Facts guide for this game, because I could not have done everything in a single playthrough without it. Sub-stories have also slightly been revamped. Most of them are still kind of forgettable, but there is a decent amount of fleshing out that can be found. There is only one slight catch, and that is the sub-stories that are focused around mini-games. These are downright evil, and why my playthrough took fucking forever, and why I'm going to recommend not trying to do all the sub-stories in this game just to fight the Amon clan at the end of the game. It just isn't worth it. You get the first taste of pain when you have to do the golf minigame sub-story. You have to score 800 points to get the title from the Golf Pro, which also gives you something that you have to sell to the pawn shop owner so you can befriend him. This is what the first course looks like. You know, pretty basic, with a big 100-point sign. Now, here is the alien course for the sub-story. What the fuck? This sub-story took me at least 6 hours. None of the guides for it were helpful. They all tell you, just time it, bro. Beat your head against the brick wall that is this sub-story until you win. I could not internalize the timing I needed to hit the spinning sign to save my life. Thankfully, I found one Japanese video showing the best method to actually do this sub-story. In their video, they did this strategy was 23 miles per hour wind to the left, but I was able to do it with 24, so keep that in mind. What you need to do is aim for these hole-in-ones on the ground because they are stationary and give you 200 points, so you only then need to get 4 hole-in-ones in 10 swings, rather than hitting the 100-point sign 8 times in 10 swings. This minigame has 10 possible wind speeds, 20 to 25 miles per hour in both left and right directions. If you get the wind going to the right, just quit the minigame and restart it, because you're wasting your fucking time otherwise. The fastest way to tell is seeing which direction the flag is pointing. Once you get the ideal wind conditions, then you turn Kiryu 20 degrees to the right. Then you need to hit the ball with 56% power with your swing at 23 degrees. Even knowing this strat, it's going to take you fucking forever because it is a 2 in 10 chance to get the right wind speed, and by the time you get it, you will most likely have already forgotten the muscle memory you've built up until now. Then there is the baseball minigame sub-story, which I now know where Winnie the Pooh's home run derby got its inspiration from. You have to hit 10 home runs in 20 pitches against this MLB baseball pitcher visiting Japan from America, and he throws the balls like this. Interestingly enough, he is the only character in the game who uses the San honorific instead of Mr. like every other character in the game. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be because he's an American who speaks broken Japanese, or if this was just an oversight in the localization. This one wasn't too bad, it only took me 45 minutes to do, but still, what the fuck are some of these pitches? By far the worst is the Mahjong minigame. Who the fuck is responsible for this? Hiroyuki Sakamoto, was this your doing? Is this some kind of sick joke to you? Does my pain bring you pleasure? So not only does the game start you with 10,000 points as a handicap when the standard is 25,000, the AI is blatantly cheating. Wow, 2 of my opponents declare Ricci in the first hand multiple times? They sure are lucky. Gee, I'm 1 tile away from winning and suddenly the guy to the left of me calls Ricci every single time? Huh, I guess I'm just unlucky. I spent 6+ fucking hours with 2 friends trying to win this fucking minigame and I couldn't. There was one time I almost won by getting a 13 orphans, and then again, it got stolen right out from under me. I actually learned how to play Mahjong because of this sub-story. I can now claim that I know how to play this stupid fucking game. And actually do enjoy it when I'm not being blatantly cheated. At least in the case of Kiwami 2, there is an item you could find out in the world that just auto-wins the game for you. Which I don't know how you're supposed to win without it, since the game starts you with 1,000 points, which is 1/25 of the standard amount. You will lose in a single hand if you don't score points on the first go-around. Why did they make make either version of this sub-story like this. You're never going to get anyone who doesn't already know how to play Mahjong into the game by stacking the deck so unfairly against them, and people who already do know how to play Mahjong and do like it aren't going to enjoy these sub-stories since the AI blatantly cheat. It just leaves me wondering, who is this sub-story made for? Thankfully, you don't need to do the Mahjong, Patchy Slot, or either of the two Shogi sub-stories in order to fight the Amons. This is another place I do want to praise Kiwami 2 for. It's actually fairly faithful to the sub-stories of the original. They don't have needless bloat added to them like in Kiwami 1. They condensed multiple sub-stories that were in a series into a single one to prevent bloat in the sub-story list and make them flow better. They do have some minor changes like locations being different for a few of them, like the email job where the guy you're supposed to get the money from for doing this mission is now in the underground section of Theater Square instead of in the bowling alley. They actually cut down on some of the tedium with the Cyclops Oba fights requirements for food. In the original, you had to bring him 3 of whatever he was asking for, which was pretty annoying since you only had 9 inventory slots. But now, he only asks you for 1 item each time. They tied up a few loose ends, like Kiryu not getting Yuya's employees' money back from the tree scammers. They fixed some mistranslations, like Granny White saying you killed Lao in the original, which didn't happen. You didn't kill Lao in Yakuza 1, yet all of these characters say and act as if you did. You simply fought him to save Haruka, you got arrested, and then you never see him again. He's just not in the story anymore. The Exorcism sub-story is played more comedic this time, and the Building the Playground sub-story has the con man in the end turn over a new leaf and become a good guy, instead of just simply paying Kiryu back and keeping Kiryu from beating him up again. The This for That sub-story has a few rewrites to make it flow better, giving you reasons to go from one place to another instead of just randomly bumping into them like in the original. And they changed 2 of the events, which were getting the boots from a cosplay girl instead of a construction worker for giving him your pen to help him take measurements, and the drunk girl lost her scarf in Kiwami 2 instead of ballerina slippers. When it's changes like this that don't really matter and there's only minor tone changes compared to all of them being played up as jokes like in Kiwami 1, it doesn't really bother me. There also isn't any main plot related sub-stories like in Yakuza 1 that were messed up or ruined due to tonal shifts and lack of quality where there should have been. If there was a sub-story on the level of importance as the fake Mizuki one from the first game, and I felt it was botched on the level that that one was, I would definitely be complaining here. The only one that really fits that criteria of importance is the Black Thunder sub-story, which gives us more of a look into Yuya's past and some of his friends and his girlfriend. And it's completely intact in Kiwami 2, if anything, it's even better because of some of the additional lines that were added. But in Kiwami 2, ultimately the only ones that are changed are the ones that are kind of forgettable nothing. Like, I'm not going to get mad at Kiwami 2 and point at it as a lackluster remake because it doesn't have the fake pregnancy sub-story, and instead is replaced with the one where the dude shits himself in the park bathroom and you have to go get him new pants, or how Kanematsu's suit is gray instead of gold in Kiwami 2. Would I like these things to be the same as they were in the original? Ideally, yes, but I think there are places in this game that are far more egregious in its lack of care that are far more important to bring up than making a checklist of all the sub-stories that didn't come back or were slightly changed. I definitely think that it is a factor in showing that it isn't a faithful remake, but in level of importance, this is like 5th, maybe 6th on the list, maybe even lower if I'm forgetting about something. Maybe you could argue that I'm not being as critical as I was in Kiwami 1, and that this is hypocritical to say, but honestly, it just didn't bother me nearly as much as it did in Kiwami 1. It felt like everywhere I went, everything was a joke. The one that really sticks out in my mind that I felt was pretty tasteless was this one sub-story where a guy was attacked from behind and had his bag stolen, which had his seizure medicine in it, and he would die if he didn't get it back in time. This is a sub-story you could actively fail if you didn't do it right away. If you took too long and came back, a different NPC would be standing around there and would talk about how there was a man begging for his life, begging for help, that no one helped him, and he ended up dying on the street. It was kind of a sobering moment. You fucked up. You could have saved him, but you chose not to. You chose to do other things. You didn't take his request seriously and got distracted, and someone ended up dying because of it. It felt like the game wasn't pulling any punches. It was just the reality of the situation, the cruelty of the city of Kamurocho, and it built on that feeling that the game was exemplifying. For contrast, in Kiwami 1, it ends with him running off and he forgets his medicine, and it's like, whoa, come back! You dropped your medicine! Good. I'm super happy that they did not make all of the befriending sub-stories super boring and convoluted because they were about 30 seconds each in the original. You just do the same thing you did there, and it's good even if it's forgettable. Some of the people you befriend are different, but again, this is something that doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's not like, oh damn, you're really missing out on this one character because they didn't come back. You just fight a guy to save them or buy enough things from their shop and then suddenly they're your friend. The biggest issue with Substories in Kiwami 2 is an overarching issue that has festered from Kiwami 1 and was never addressed. A lot of the overarching issues from that game can be found here, but the one that is most apparent in Substories is the music. Music cues are still painfully formulaic, using the same tracks from Yakuza fucking 5 that came out in 2012, that they are still using now, almost a decade later. RGG, please, for the love of God, make new music. I'm tired of hearing the same 6 songs over and over again for every single sub-story in all of your games. You have the revenge sub-story where a woman is asking you to help find her little sister who has been sold into human trafficking, and as she's explaining the plan to you, fucking Bossa Nova starts playing. It also still has the jarring fade-ins and abrupt cutoffs that make sub-stories feel like a cheap afterthought, along with the terrible sub-story complete sound effect still being present, which ruins any emotional moment that these sub-stories try to end on. One thing that I think is really underappreciated about the original 2 games is that they knew when to stop wasting your time. They knew when to teleport you back to another location, especially if you're going between a character or characters or locations over and over again. In doing this, it holds back the potential of tedium for the entire game. It minimizes the feeling of wasting time because you're walking through the same streets over and over again, and in turn makes the city still feel fresh or at least not overstay its welcome. It minimizes the repetition of combat because you'll no longer be getting into random battles from passing dudes on the street, and most of all, it keeps the pace flowing. With the series becoming more and more focused on the side content and sub-stories as those are what really brought in the new age of fans, the new games constantly have to give you the opportunity to stop what you're doing in the main story so you can veer off the beaten path and go fuck around. Lost Judgment has this the worst, where every single thing you do gives you the opportunity to stop following the main story, which results in the most backtracking in the entire franchise. I honestly think that the series needs some level of linearity, the level that the original 2 games had. After we get our fill of our newfound freedom, we run into a guy trying to start shit. We tell him we peacocked his mom like the Chad we are, and then marry his front teeth to the curb. A dude in a purple suit walks up to us and introduces himself as Kurakawa. If there's anything you need to know in this town, he's the guy to go to. We can't get into the Club Grand because the top floor has been reserved for a VIP, so Kurakawa does us a solid by blackmailing this guy he met at the hemorrhoid clinic because his nephew's teacher's sister's husband's twin brother plays mahjong with the owner and has some dirt on him. So now it's time to relax and enjoy some drinks, but this relaxation is cut short by a guy who would unknowingly go on to be one of the most iconic characters in the series. Ryuji Goda is the baddest motherfucker there ever was. This man steals the show anytime he's on screen with his captivating, commanding presence and raw charisma. He is the perfect foil to Kiryu as a complete inverse to him and his ideology, still holding the title as the best antagonist in the entire series. He's basically a realistic portrayal of what Kiryu would be like if he was an actual hardcore criminal. He is just so damn cool, and the perfect vehicle to driving Kiryu's ideology to its absolute limits, causing Kiryu to further grow into the legend we see today. Ryuji wants one thing and one thing only: to be the best. He hates his title, the Dragon of Kansai. The dragon part's fine, it's the Kansai part that implies that he's merely a smaller fish in the larger pond that is the Japanese criminal underworld. And in his eyes, this world only has room for one dragon. We've been so focused on Ryuji that I haven't even gotten to talk about Kiryu in this scene. This is hands down one of his best in the entire series. It makes me giddy anytime I see it because Kiryu is just so fucking cool. Completely no-selling getting hit over the head with a bottle after just seeing the damage done to one of Ryuji's goons, giving zero fucks telling Ryuji what pisses him off the most and then tries to leave like it's nothing, making quick work of Ryuji's boys, ending off with such a fun to watch tense one-on-one with Ryuji, who parts with the warning, the party of a lifetime is about to start. The biggest fireworks you've ever seen will be in Kamurocho, and that's just the opening ceremony. Tomorrow, Kiryu Kazuma will die. We also take our leave, and something seems to be wrong outside. Everyone's panicking and talking about something happening, so we rush over to the giant screen near the bridge, and sure enough, the Millennium Tower has blown up again. It's now the morning, meaning it's time to go to the Omi headquarters with Daigo to meet Chairman Gota to negotiate a truce. While the duo is on their way, we swap perspectives to introduce one of the new characters, Kaoru Sayama of the Osaka Police Department Division 4 Organized Crime. She's the lead detective of this unit and is referred to as the Yakuza Huntress. The original translation called her the Yakuza Eater, but that one sounds a little dumb, so we'll be sticking with the modern translation. This game was really spot on with introducing cool characters. This scene also introduces her boss Besho, who is told that they need to put Kazuma Kiryu in protective custody so he can't be killed, and Sayama volunteers to do the job as this is her opportunity to get close to the Tojo. We finally arrived at the Omi HQ and they've rolled out the red carpet for us. This is our first access to the item box, meaning that any extra items we have that can't fit in our inventory will be stored in it. Up until now, anything we had that was beyond our 9 slots would have just been automatically discarded, which could be an issue if you're doing some of the sub-stories that need items like the golf one. I did not get the chance to bring it up earlier, but another amazing quality of life improvement is that gear no longer takes up one of your 9 inventory slots when you equip it. This really frees up the clutter and gives you a reason to experiment with your gear. Up until now, we've only heard of the Omi Alliance's chairman, so it comes at quite a surprise to meet the man behind such a towering organization threatening to swallow up the Tojo, and assumedly has a legendary reputation of his own as a man bound to a wheelchair. This is where we are also introduced to the top men of the Omi. Sengoku is a brash fat pig who is always with his gold-tipped hand fan. His whole shtick is about money. He's a gaudy big spender, and thinks all of his issues can be solved by dropping big piles of cash. Sadly, his suit in Kiwami 2 looks really bad. I always thought his suit was shiny gold in the original, like how the Nueve Richie look. In this game, his suit looks more like an off green in my eyes. This might be because of the color filter, but either way, it's a shame that one of the defining characterizing aspects of his appearance is subpar. Though his issue isn't nearly as big as Takashima's. For some reason, they decided to remodel Takashima after his new voice actor, Haku Ryu. I just don't understand why they did this. Obviously, it's because they wanted him to play a character in the game since he's a famous Japanese actor who has starred in plenty of Yakuza films with the likes of Takeshi Kitano, who also played a character in Yakuza 6, but in doing this, it conflicts with his pre-established character from an over decade-old game. Takashima went from being a young genius Tokyo University graduate who astonishingly climbed his way to the top of the Omi in a way and at a pace that no one has ever done before. Now he's turned into an old man whose model was the same age as Jin Gota is at the time of making this game. Thankfully, there is a mod that someone made to swap him back to how he looked in the original, but as the creator admitted themselves, the mod isn't perfect.
寺田。いや、登場界5代目とは兄弟分でした。
Back to the actual meeting itself, Takashima and Chairman Gota do actually seem remorseful for the death of Terada, as he was very close to both of them, Takashima especially. Daigo finds this to be nothing more than empty gestures, and Sengoku can't even pretend to be remorseful, which only further fuels Daigo's rage. This leads to the reveal of what is really happening within the Omi. Like the Roman Empire, the Omi Alliance has gotten too big for its own good, spreading itself so far and thin that it is not realistically feasible to keep all of these families in order and unified under one ideal. They reveal that it's actually Ryuji and his Go-Ryu clan that killed Terada against the wishes of his father. It was also Ryuji who conspired against Terada with Jingu in the first game. This does conflict with what Jingu says in Yakuza 1, as he claims he's been planning all of this with the 5th chairman for over a year. So this is a contradiction and retcon, but it's easy to imagine that Ryuji either posed as the 5th chairman or tricked Jingu into believing that his father was on board with the plan, even if it's not outright explained by the game. Like what I talked about with Daigo back in Chapter Chapter 1, I think this is another new revelation that works and doesn't feel forced. Things are finally starting to look like they're going to work out, as Chairman Gota is more than happy to sign the peace treaty and agrees to do so at the Tojo headquarters. This agreement is interrupted by Ryuji and his clan as they storm the room, kidnapping the chairman and starting their own coup. They aren't letting any kind of truce happen when Ryuji has his sights on destroying the Tojo. Daigo says to settle his score with Ryuji, so it's up to us to save Chairman Gota so the truce can happen. This is our first set piece in the game where we have to fight our way through the headquarters. These fat dudes holding chairs are introduced here, and they're such an annoying enemy. They just impede progress and not in any interesting way. All they do is stand still and swing a couch at you. For some reason, RGG decided that what if we take an enemy that was already annoying in the original and make them even more annoying, because now you can't deal with them in the same way you would in the original by spamming heat actions until they die. They also have super armor like a fighting game, so you can't even do combos on them. You have to punch them once, get this obnoxious bounce back recovery animation, and then try to dodge back with your pathetic dodge, and try not to get slammed and have to deal with the idiotic physics. Thankfully, there is a mod to remove the terrible recovery animations when attacking these guys and enemies that are blocking. This small change helps the flow of combat so much because no longer are your combos interrupted when an enemy blocks, which a bunch of enemies can just ignore your juggling and block against you. If you're playing on PC, I say this mod is vital to playing this game. I can't imagine playing without it. A link for it will be in the description below. We finally reached the courtyard we came in from, where Ryuji quickly catches up to us from behind. If we want to get Chairman Gota, we have to go through him first. Sadly, another one of the overarching Kiwami issues rears its ugly head here, and that is the lack of details. Firstly, the reflections on the ground are gone again, just like they were during the batting cage fight with Majima in Kiwami 1. The crowds of the Omi men that greeted us, which formed a ring around the arena, are gone and replaced with these tacky red walls with stop signs on them. A game from 2006 is somehow finding a way to outdo the quality of a game from 2018. And this isn't even the first and only instance of this in the game either. We could look back to the very first boss fight of the game with Daigo Dojima. The storm is non-existent during the actual boss fight. Here's what the boss fight looks like in the original game. Look how hard it is raining. There is tons of thunder and lightning, yet that isn't found in Kiwami 2 at all. And this doesn't seem to be anything that the game can't do. And you want to know why I think that? Because I ran into a bug on my playthrough where it didn't show the dynamic camera at the start of the boss fight. Instead, it was just the camera behind Kiryu as if I was in actual combat. So the lightning that you see during this dynamic camera angle isn't a pre-rendered effect. It's something that's happening in-engine, in the moment. And Ryuji's heat aura is red. In fact, every boss in this game's heat aura is red, despite having unique colors in the original. I'm guessing they saw this as not an important enough detail to have. This is a holdover issue from Yakuza 6, where everybody outside of the final boss is the same basic red, and the only thing unique about the final boss is he has some trails of white mixed in with his red heat aura. While this was a very lame aspect of Yakuza 6, at least those characters were all new and didn't have readily established colors that people identify with them. Why not keep to the original? The heat auras are the most iconic visual aesthetic of the franchise. Majima's color has been purple since the very first game in the series, and they even gave him small bursts of purple heat when you play as him later. Why does his boss fight not have this? Why did it take till Judgment, the third game in the Dragon Engine, to fix this? The fight is also far worse in the Dragon Engine, as his AI just kept rushing me down doing the grab move over and over again, and at this point you won't have any upgrades to make the combat actually bearable. And while we do beat Ryuji, Kiryu says that it wasn't a fair fight as he had to just fight Daigo, which is no pushover himself. Yeah, which we all know is a big fat fucking lie. So the two of them will have to have their rematch at some point when on even footing. We hear sirens closing in and Ryuji runs back into the building. Sayama jumps out of the police cruiser and puts us under arrest. We now switch to Date's perspective, who bumps into Kawara. They seem to have a less than pleasant history with each other, as Date refers to him as Killer Kawara, while Kawara scoffs, asking if seeing him kill a few perps all those years ago still traumatizes him. Date is clearly uncomfortable and just wants to get away from him as fast as possible, but as he's trying to make his getaway, Kawara stops him, telling him that he knows that Sudo called him down and is waiting for both of them. Basement 3 Archive Room 13 is where Sudo and Chief of Foreign Affairs Kurahashi reveals to Date that they want want him to go undercover and get close to a friend of his, Kazuki. You see, Kazuki goes by another name, Jinwoo Kong. Foreign Affairs believes that Kazuki might be a part of the Korean mafia, and 6 months ago, Ryuji Goda went to Kamurocho and the only person he met was Kazuki, and they have a recording of Ryuji Goda planning the bombing of the Millennium Tower, but they don't know who he's talking to and where that person is. So it's up to Date to get this information out of Kazuki, see where his allegiance lies, and see if he's really a part of this unfolding conspiracy. Back to Kiryu and Sayama. After they get far enough away from Omi HQ, she takes off his handcuffs as they were all just for show. He isn't actually under arrest. That was all just a cover to put him into protective custody, as the police can't afford to have Kiryu be killed now because that would result in an all-out war, which would likely bring more innocent lives caught in the crossfire. While parked on the side of the road, Kiryu notices a sniper on one of the roofs in a building far off in the distance. Sayama has been shot in the shoulder, and before she passes out, she tells us to find a bar named Aoi. We rush through the streets of Sotenbori where we eventually find it on the south side of town. The owner mistakes us for just another basic Yakuza grunt trying to get protection money out of her before we mention Sayama. She yells at us to run back to the car and go get her, so now we have to rush back to the bar before she bleeds out, all while trying to dodge annoying people who try to stop and talk to us. Once we get her to the bar, we give the bartender some space to operate on her. So now it's time where the town is fully open up to us, and there are more substories available. After a while, Kiryu will get a call from the bartender asking us to pick up some bandages on our way back. Sayama is still asleep, but her condition is stabilized, so we spend some time talking to Tamayo. It turns out that she's Sayama's mother. Well, her foster mother at least. Like Kiryu, her parents died at a young age, leaving her an orphan. Sayama wakes up and is as snarky as ever. She remarks how whoever shot her was not trying to kill them. Whoever they were clearly a trained professional to make a shot that far, and the bullet they used was smaller than the standard rifle ammo. She tells us to take this bullet to the local mahjong parlor and talk to a man in a blue vest, give him the password, and he will tell us exactly what we need to know. The mahjong parlor is invite only, requiring us to get a special tile in order to get in. In the original, there are two possible ways to get into it. First is you could talk to the guard 15 times and then you'll get into a fight with him. After kicking his ass, you'll be able to go inside, but in doing this, you'll be locked out of one of the substories later. The other objective, which is made the main objective in Kiwami 2, is to talk to one of the gods of the mahjong parlor at the Sega arcade. You have to win him a red cat from the claw machine in order to talk to him, which you only got one try in the original, so you better have saved beforehand. He'll get us in if we save what we originally think is his daughter from some Omi goons who set him up to inherit 5 million yen in debt. It turns out it's actually his cat, but we get it back regardless and are given the cherry tile in order to get into the parlor. Inside, we find our informant and give him the password. He tells us the person who hired this sniper was none other than Takashima of the Omi Alliance. We jump to Takashima's perspective, who is being held in an Osaka PD interrogation room. He gets confirmation from the shooter that they left enough clues that Kiryu would be able to trace the shot back to him. He did this to show that Kiryu can't trust anyone. Takashima's real colors show in this cutscene. He's quite the two-faced snake. All of those words about how he and Terada were brothers, Daigo was right. They were all nothing more than an empty act. He tries to convince Besho that the Omi were the victims here and that he should be having Sayama arrest Kiryu, and lays down some implied threats her way, but Besho isn't buying any of his bullshit and sends him on his way with a warning that he doesn't know what Takashima's up to and what he's planning, but if he thinks he's doing anything and going to get away with it, his clan and the Goryeo clan will be locked up before they could even blink. Back to the parlor, the informant gets a call and things quickly turn south for Kiryu. He now has a 100 million yen bounty on his head, and these Japanese salarymen aren't going to let that much cash walk right out the door. Of course, Kiryu makes quick work of them, and now that I understand mahjong, I can appreciate that the tile that left an indent on the informant's head while Kiryu was slamming his face into the table is the red dragon tile. I think that's cute. Since the mahjong parlor couldn't get the job done, Sengoku has his boys bring in a treasure chest filled with 1 billion yen and tells them to take this to Kamurocho and spread the wealth around to find anyone and everyone who can kill Kiryu. In Kiwami 2, we are now introduced to one of the two large minigame substories, the Cabaret Club. It's such an awkward placement here as we're walking back to inform Sayama what just happened, and now we're getting roped into doing a shitty minigames tutorial and forced to see this pointless story that no one cares about. Basically, this is a diner dash minigame where you have to assign hostesses to tables based on their corresponding strengths to what the customer wants. There is also a management side to this this minigame, and our overall goal is to be the best club in the area and win the Grand Prix. I personally find this fucking boring as hell, and to cut down on the runtime of this already overly long video, this is all we're going to talk about it. If you are someone who is interested in the story of this minigame and how it plays out, I would highly recommend just watching the cutscenes on YouTube rather than playing it, because it is a far better use of your time in my opinion. As we make our way back to the bar, we overhear Sayama and her mother arguing. Tamayo is worried that Sayama is pushing herself too hard after just getting shot, and is worried that she will destroy herself in this hunt for the truth about her parents. Tamayo insists that her parents weren't killed by the Tojo, but Sayama refuses to buy this and knows something is up and will hunt down the truth even if Tamayo won't tell her. Kiryu is her golden ticket to getting this info, so she is going to follow him to the end of the earth. Kiryu awkwardly walks in to break up this conversation, and Sayama gets a call from Besho, who is looking to talk to Kiryu. While on their way back to Kamurocho, Daigo and Chairman Goto were kidnapped by a group of men speaking a foreign language with machine guns. Their truck headed into Kamurocho, so that's our next destination too. As we walk through the iconic gates of Kamurocho, Sayama starts to feel lightheaded, and Kiryu catches her as she's about to collapse. She's running a high fever and is clearly pushing herself too hard for someone who was just shot. So we take her to Sereno, which has been left untouched and unchanged since Reina's death last year. After we set her down on one of the couches, we get a call from Kashiwagi. We give him a little update on the situation and say that we'll give a more detailed explanation at Tojo HQ. Outside, we get stopped by one of Komaki's other pupils saying that he has a letter for us. Komaki's currently hanging out in the alleyway that we beat the White Edges in last year when Haruka was kidnapped and wants to see us. Now in Chapter 5, there is actual side content to do in Kamurocho, so we might as well go around town and meet up with him to see what he wants. On Showa Street, we run into a woman who is currently running the Sunflower Orphanage, the place Kiryu grew up and where Haruka is currently staying. Sadly, with Kazama's death and with how the Tojo has been struggling, care for the orphanage has sadly slipped despite Kashiwagi's best efforts. Kiryu, wanting to help them any way he can, is now able to donate money to the woman directly or at any of the ATMs in the convenience stores. After you donate enough money to the woman, she'll mention how there is a new kid who has arrived and is having trouble acclimating to their new environment. Kiryu suggests trying to find something that interests him, and she mentions how he used to take care of the pets for his class. We remember the dog that we saved last year and we go try and find it. The homeless guys of Purgatory have been taking care of it until now, and are happy to let the kids take care of it since the main homeless man taking care of the dog had passed away recently. I'm not sure why, but in Kiwami 2 they actually made this moment a lot sadder when in the original it was one of the few lighthearted moments. In the original the dog's name was Dog Spot, since some of the homeless guys called it Dog and the others called it Spot that it eventually just landed on Dog Spot. Now in Kiwami 2 the dog's name is Pochitaru. Now the homeless man Mogusa is actually sad to see it go, but ultimately lets Kiryu take the dog because it's for the better. I'm not going to say one way or the other is better in this situation, but it does strike me as odd that they would change one of the lighthearted moments of the original to a sad one, when they usually change things to be more comedic, like the shoplifting lady is now the annoying old bitch from Yakuza 0. After we bring the dog back, we get an update from Haruka saying that everyone loves the dog and the boy has finally started to come out of his shell. Though when you walk back to Suenaga, she'll tell you that the roof has a leak in it and they'll need 250,000 yen in order to fix it. After you give her the amount needed, you'll find out that she seems to have been scammed, and the repair guys are now asking for 5 million yen since they went ahead and fixed other parts of the house that needed work without asking. You meet up with the con artists and make them reconsider the bill. It's finally time for the original overseer of the orphanage to return as their health has improved, and as a parting gift, Suenaga wants to build the kids a playground. We call up the con artist and he's more than happy to return the favor free of charge. Like I mentioned earlier, in Kiwami 2 they made it so the con artist turns over a new leaf and becomes an upstanding guy in a real construction firm that doesn't try to scam people. Now that that's over, we head over to Pink Street where some guys in suits say that the road is closed. Kiryu obviously isn't having any of this and tries to keep going, which results in a fight breaking out. Out from one of the buildings comes a man who says his name is Gondewara, the patriarch of the Gondewara family, and apologizes for his men's behavior, and as a token of goodwill invites us to the club he has rented out. Once we get inside, something seems a little off. The hostess offers us breast milk and tries to put us in a diaper, but Kiryu is a Sigma male and won't be tempted by mommy milkers, which makes the situation even worse.
楽しんどるが。
This scene is so fucking funny, and is even funnier in Kiwami 2 with the more expressive faces that Kiryu has. The dude just wants to learn some kung fu in a dirty alley from an old guy, not get roped into some other dude's age play kink. So now we have to fight our way out of here by beating up some big babies. After this fight, the guys outside thank us for hopefully beating some sense into their patriarch, as they aren't into the whole baby thing either, but as Kiryu knows, what the patriarch says is absolute. We finally got to Komaki, which gives us some challenges to relearn some things that we've forgotten from last year. In Kiwami 2, this is where we learn Extreme Heat, which is kind of like a dragon install. When your heat gauge is completely full, you can press R2 to activate Extreme Heat. This gives you special extended heat actions, increased combo potential, and my favorite part, the new empowered triangle button finishers. Since Yakuza 6, it feels like the series has tried to move away from heat moves as a big cash-in for damage, and instead wants you to use these devil triggers more and more. It feels really apparent in Judgment, where your heat moves do fuck all in my opinion. Now that we've talked to Komaki and learned a few things, we leave out the Champion District and run into some guys that look kind of familiar.
堂島の竜、桐生一馬さんだぞ。
These two clowns have been impersonating Shinji and Kiryu, going around town using their names to try to extort people for money and get free meals. It always came off as kind of weird how easy Kiryu let these dudes off the hook, considering one of them is going around ruining the name and reputation of one of his closest friends who bled out in his arms only a year prior. But don't worry, I made up for the narrative disconnect in gameplay. Now is when we get access to the two large sub-stories of this game that were a big draw-in during release. In Yakuza 1, they'd have you go to cabaret clubs to get close to hostesses, and eventually you'd get a small sub-story with them, and after you got their heart meter to 10, you'd have implied sex. In Yakuza 2, they have the roles reversed, where Kiryu has to go undercover at a club named Adam to help the abused workers because the owner and his son are ruining their lives. In this minigame, Kiryu has to be a shallow asshole telling them exactly what they want to hear in order to raise their heart gauge, instead of Kiryu being a shallow asshole telling them exactly what they want to hear in order to raise their heart gauge. Yeah, while it's novel at first, you quickly realize it's the exact same minigame. You're gonna end up looking up a guide to give them the right answers because you're wasting your time and money otherwise. And to this minigame's credit, it does have more of a story than just simply befriending the hostesses. The second large sub-story is also focused around cabaret clubs, but instead of being a patron or a worker, this time around you're a manager, and you have to make this club as successful as possible while the real owner is off in the countryside taking care of his sick mother. Again, initially it seems really cool to see the cabaret clubs from another angle, but in reality, it's a really shallow minigame. You're better off just following a guide so you don't have to spend longer than you have to, because all you really do is just buy furniture, talk to the girls to make sure their moods are good, which means you have to give them flowers each time, then you fuck around in the overworld until the payroll guy calls you to tell you how much they've made, then rinse and repeat until you have the best furniture to renovate to the next club size. These two minigames are more so vehicles to the narratives of their corresponding sub-stories, but honestly, they aren't all that interesting. I'd say the Adam one only gets interesting after you get closer to the manager, who is revealed to basically be turned into an indentured servant by the owner, and ends with you buying the club out from under the evil bastard and giving it to him to make it a proper place that people can enjoy. I just wish that they made these two sub-stories and befriending the hostesses, which there are 10 of in this game, not required to fight Amon, because they feel like such a chore and take forever to do, since all of them rely so much on waiting for phone calls to progress and do anything, which just means you're going to end up sitting AFK in a building because they're the only place in the game where you can leave the game idle and the clock will still move forward. If you sit idle in the overworld, a text box will pop up and the game's clock will not move forward, so you won't receive this phone call. Speaking of phone calls, while we're walking around town, we get a call from an unknown person who says to meet them at the Amano building at 1 AM tomorrow alone, if we ever want to see Daigo again. With that, we head to Tojo HQ and inform Kashiwagi and Yayoi on what's going on. We tell them that we're going to listen to the caller's request and meet them, since we have no other leads. Yayoi orders Shindo, who has become the patriarch of the Nishikiyama family, to shadow Kiryu as backup, but he refuses as he still has beef with Kiryu due to the events of last year. With the meeting ending on a rather tense note, Yayoi asks us to meet her in the lobby to tell us something. Since the events of last year, the Nishikiyama family has become well over half of the Tojo's manpower, as the families of the dead patriarchs like the Shimano family merged with his. We can't risk having Shindo break off of the clan now, because if he does, then the Go-Ryu will have no problem snuffing the life of the Tojo out. Kiryu then suggests an idea that neither of them would probably be too happy about. He wants to bring back Majima. Initially opposed to the idea, Yayoi and Kashiwagi see no other option and tell Kiryu that Majima spends his days in purgatory as he now runs the place. When we go to leave, there is a shady guy at the front gate saying he's here for a gas leak report that they got. The guards haven't heard anything about this, and then the man blows his cover and assaults them. It turns out he's another assassin here to make an attempt on Kiryu's life, but besides his incredible speed, he's pretty much a pushover. Once we get back into Kamurocho, Sayama has woken up and is demanding we tell her where we are. And she reminds us that we are still in protective custody and she can arrest us at any time if she wants. She also asks us to pick up some underwear and beer since she didn't expect us to be staying overnight here. Once we get back to the bar, we can't seem to find her.
As a man, I can have self-control, and self-control is what you need to be the perfect man. This eye-tracking video that I'm going to watch, not only am I not going to look at anything sexual, I'm going to complete the whole eye-tracking challenge without looking at a single butt or a single boob. This eye-tracking challenge is going to be the easiest challenge of my life, and I will prove to all the other men in chat that we don't need to look at boobs. We can look at people for who they are. Me,
Kiryu Kazumada.
I will represent all men in the chat, and I will not look at a single boob, and I will not look at a single butt in this video. Let's go! Fuck!
Kiryu decides to reveal that he overheard her conversation with Tamayo about her trying to get close to the Tojo to find out about their past actions. The two of them finally get a chance to actually have an open conversation with each other. They find common ground on the fact that they are both orphans, and Sayama tells us how she was raised under the notion that her parents died of an illness while she was too young to remember them, but she always had an underlying feeling that her mother was lying to her. That suspicion was confirmed one day when she overheard Tamayo yelling the phrase, "It's the Tojo that made Kaoru's life a living hell," while talking to someone on the phone. No matter how much she pressured her mother to reveal the truth, she wouldn't budge, saying that knowing won't make you any happier. This led her to joining the police and becoming an investigator, and the conversation we're having now. Kiryu can also sympathize with her plight since his real parents were killed by the Tojo like she believes hers were. Similar to what her mother said, Kiryu also imparts some advice that maybe it's better off not knowing, as once he found out the truth of his past, it brought him nothing but pain, wishing that he never learned the truth. I love this scene. I think it's one of the best in the game, and that's saying a lot when Yakuza 2 is filled to the brim with amazing cutscenes. I see it as one of two scenes when put together become the equivalent of the car ride scene from Yakuza 1, which was an encapsulation of that game's themes. Because Kiryu isn't completely open with Sayama, revealing what his secret actually is, she is unable to understand where he's coming from. His words fall on deaf ears as she can't see the bigger picture, being so absorbed in the hunt for the truth, which is one of the main messages of this game story. Leaving those close to you in the dark, no matter how much you think it's for their own sake, will only create a rift between you and them, and put them on a self-destructive path as they become obsessed with discovering this truth. Kuroda's performance in the scene is also stellar. It's so subdued. We are seeing Kiryu speak in a way that we've never seen before. He feels genuinely vulnerable, and it sounds like Kuroda is struggling to get the lines to come out of his mouth. It's perfect. It captures that feeling where you're really uncomfortable and not really able to articulate the words you want to say when talking about something that deeply traumatizes you, something that's so close to your heart, something that you feel like you can't just talk about with anybody. We'll come back to this later once we witness the second half I mentioned, so for now, Kiryu and Sayama are off to Purgatory to find Majima. This is the first time we've had a partner accompanying us in the overworld, which means they will assist us in any fights we get into. Yakuza 2 introduced co-op heat moves, which are kind of like the MIA kernels in Jingu's tag team attack that they could do on you in the first game. They can be kind of awkward to try and do since they all rely on your partner doing a specific starting move, like doing a chokehold or a headlock. Yuya, please stop doing the dropkick move over and over over again, you just keep missing. I really need you to grab someone so I can do the heat move that is only with you that I can only do in this fight so I can fight Joamon later. They really should have made it based off of your actions instead of relying on the actions of an AI, which the designers of Kiwami 2 clearly agreed with me and implemented this change, and is one of the best quality of life improvements in Kiwami 2. Purgatory has also seen some changes since we were last here. No longer is it a camp for the homeless, it's become a massive construction site for the upcoming Kamurocho Hills, but the underground area is still the same old sleaze pit it's always been. We make our way to the mansion in the back, and sure enough, Majima comes giggling out of the shadows. He's now in charge of the creation of the Kamurocho Hills with his new company, Majima Construction. The florist has since left Purgatory and is working in the Millennium Tower doing what he always does, but now on the police payroll. And of course, Majima is only working on the Kamurocho Hills project so he can take control of Purgatory. Kiryu asks Majima to return to the Tojo clan because they are dead in the water without his family, and Majima tells him no fucking way. Kiryu bows and begs him, and Majima eventually concedes on one condition. Kiryu has to fight in the tournament again just like last year. Our first opponent is a giant Brazilian dude with a battle axe. He's one of the more annoying fights later in the arena challenges due to his super armor and his thrust attacks which knock you down, so you can't get many hits in on the guy before you have to play super defensive. Our second fight is a rematch with Gary Buster Holmes. I love the banter between these two, with Kiryu telling Gary that his Japanese is still shit. Gary has also gotten an upgrade since we last fought him, now having spike ball gloves, and our final fight is the long anticipated rematch with Majima. This is one of the real highlight fights of the game. Majima is as fast as ever, and to accompany this fight is Receive You. You know it's Kino time when Receive You starts blasting through your speakers. With beating Majima, he's now willing to rejoin the Tojo, but Kiryu clarifies his request. Majima doesn't need to rejoin the Tojo itself, as he's clearly outgrown the clan, he just needs to lend them his strength. Majima still finds the whole situation fishy, like something's going on that we all aren't seeing. Since Terada became the 5th chairman, the Tojo and the Omi haven't really butted heads at all. He always went on about coexistence, and Majima felt he never made enough waves to warrant an assassination. He also says that if it was the Go-Ryu clan, maybe things are just as they seem, since those guys are insane. Majima also remarks how he never really liked Terada. The way Majima sees it, Terada's whole blabbering about peace has left the clan weak. He never trusted the guy either. As soon as he took over, he surrounded himself with yes-men, leaving people like Majima and Kashiwagi to the wayside. Kashiwagi being second in command is all for show. The dude is nothing more than a figurehead. Anything he wanted to do had to be run through and okayed by Terada first. Kiryu is shocked by all of this, and Majima says it's not his fault. It's not like he could have been a mind reader or a prophet to see just how Terada would have been as soon as he took over and Kiryu left. But honestly, what did you expect, Kiryu? You appointed a dude you only knew for one night, and you only really gave him the job, I assume, is because he was close to Kazama. Majima remarks there's nothing wrong with trusting people, but you gotta be careful. Giving out blind faith like he does sometimes will end up getting him a knife in the back. While we've been unlocking pieces of it over the course of our Kiwami 2 playthrough, and still haven't gotten everything up until this point in the game, now is the best time to talk about the new Majima Saga added to the game. This is a completely new, never-before-seen story of Majima that takes place between Yakuza 1 and 2, and the only thing I have to say about it is, who asked? I was explaining this section to a friend since she is playing Yakuza 2 right now and has no intention of playing Kiwami 2, and there is one thing she said about it that I haven't been able to get out of my head. The Majima Saga is the Rogue One of Yakuza. It is the ultimate don't care, didn't ask, why is this something that needed to be told? It's completely pointless with no redeeming qualities. Playing as Majima feels like shit, and the whole thing has a real cheap and rushed feel to it. Because this is a story that takes place between Yakuza 1 and 2, narratives that have already been written over a decade ago, nothing in this can happen that has any bearing on the plot because they can't affect anything that happens in Yakuza 2. So all this does is waste an hour and a half of our time telling a story that has no purpose and goes nowhere. Gee, look at all these new characters that have never been mentioned before or ever again. I wonder what's gonna happen. Oh. The only thing of note in this is the character Ibuchi, which is voiced by Takehito Koyasu, the guy who voices Dio in JoJo, but he is completely wasted on a character who is just bargain bin Takashima, even down to having the same motives and plans to betray Terada once his goal is reached and he has no use for him. All this does is answer questions that didn't fucking matter. This is something made for idiots like the clowns who did that terrible interview I referenced earlier. Wow, we really needed to see exactly how Majima got the Kamurocho Hills deal. We really needed to have an explanation to how and why Majima took over Purgatory. They made it so in reality Majima left the clan as a noble sacrifice to stop conflict with the Omi since one of their officers was caught in the crossfire and died. And to top it all off, it ends with some needless Yakuza 0 fan service masturbation that shouldn't have ever been made, but like Majima's further inclusion in the rest of the series, Yakuza 0 is a fan favorite, so they gotta give it more scenes. I really don't think that the Majima Saga section could have ever worked or been meaningful. The reason Nishikiyama's cutscenes in Kiwami 1 worked so well is they showed more of Nishikiyama's implied arc. It built upon something that was already there in the original story, but you can't do that here because what arc does Majima have in this game? He's a side character. He shows up for comic relief and is more or less a plot device to keep the Tojo from keeling over and dying since Kiryu can't be everywhere at once. It isn't until Yakuza 4 that he gets a much needed arc and depth. That's not to say he's bad in Yakuza 2 or that I dislike his inclusion here or in the rest of the series. I think he works well with what he is given in this game, and he's always entertaining anytime he's on screen. But at this point in time, with only the context of Yakuza 1 and 2, he isn't as depthful of a character as he eventually becomes, and I'm not going to act like he is. This is a section that should not have been made, and the time and resources that were put into making this should have been placed elsewhere to improve this game. After you talk to him in Kiwami 2, it transitions into the second big minigame sub-story of the remake, and that is Majima Construction. Some guys are trying to destroy all their construction equipment so they lose the Kamurocho Hills deal, so now you have to play a shitty tower defense RTS thing, and it's fucking boring as hell. The only thing more boring than playing this is the cutscene that follows, introducing all the big bads of this minigame, who are modeled after New Japan Pro wrestlers. This cutscene has consistently put me to sleep the 2 times I've been forced to watch it. I would have much rather had a game where instead of wasting precious dev time and resources on making this, the Majima Saga and the Cabaret Club, they could have made the game feel more fun to actually play and didn't have to cut out one of the main locations of the game. And like the Cabaret Club minigame, this is all we're going to talk about the clan creator in this video because it would just needlessly bloat it more than it already is. With all that out of the way, we've gotten what we've came for, so let's head back to the bar until 1 AM. Kiryu breaks his silence by asking Sayama if she is scared to find out the truth about her past, if the Tojo really killed her parents. He's finally forthcoming about his past, that his parents were killed by the Tojo, specifically the man who raised him and led him down this path in life. Since he saw Kazama as his father, he was able to forgive him, but in the end, can she? Sayama believes that if she finds whoever killed her parents, she won't be able to forgive them. Of course she is scared to find out the truth, but this is the path she has chosen and she has come this far. She's so close that she can't quit now. With that answer, Kiryu says feel free to use him to find the truth, which Sayama is really surprised by. This is the first time he's verbalized it, but Kiryu isn't proud of his life as a Yakuza. With the death of his friends and family along with trying to raise Haruka right, it has led him to see that the life of organized crime and the life he wants to lead are 2 different things. It's interesting because Kiryu has always come off as an out-of-place weirdo in the context of the Yakuza. Kikuchi even remarked it in an interview how Kiryu is the noble samurai type compared to the typical gangster thug type. As time passed, it became more and more apparent that Kiryu's philosophy and honorable approach to organized crime was unrealistic. There were those who followed this pursuit like Kazama, but it becomes harder and harder to live by this ideal when you are in the minority, and it is far easier to live the mobster lifestyle. A lifestyle where the bottom line is making money, getting as much of it as fast as you can without considering the lives of others, even those closest to you, as they are mere stepping stones for you to reach your goals. So Kiryu makes a resolution to Sayama. If in the end, it turns out that Kiryu was somehow responsible for her parents' death, point that gun at him, pull the trigger, and don't look back. And while I 100% believe that Kiryu means what he is saying here, I also think he's putting this option in front of Sayama to show her, this is the weight of pursuing your truth. Do you have it in you to see it through to the end? After fading in from black, we are back to following Date and Kawara. They are finally making their move on Kazuki, going to Stardust in person. They tell Kazuki that he should close his bar because the police are about to raid every shop in Kamurocho with 400 officers to round up any and all illegal immigrants they could find due to the recent bombing. In reality, this is just a cover story to see how Kazuki would react. Kawara says if he is really a part of the Korean mob, he'll make a break for it to warn his boys, and if he isn't, he should theoretically continue on as normal. Right as Kawara finishes saying this, Kazuki bolts out the club with both of them following in pursuit. We are back to playing as Kiryu, and it's time to head to the Amano building. Since we don't know where it is, we're going to the theater square first to talk to Tamura to find out. On our way, we bump into Yuya, who tells us what just happened with Kazuki. Since we are in a rush, we have to leave this curious predicament aside for now. Once we talk to Morita, who's filling in for Tamura right now, and get the keys to the Amano building from this retro game gang 16-bit, we're finally inside the building. The fight with the 16-bit gang leaders is an excellent spot to grind XP, because if you ignore them and don't fight them at all, their henchmen will spawn in endlessly for a few minutes. Since we agreed to come alone, Sayama has to wait outside, and as soon as we get into the lobby, we are ambushed by a man in black. He's going to be a recurring fight throughout the building, as we have to fight our way through the Korean mobsters to reach the roof, where at the top we find Date, Kawara, and 2 Kazukis. Not only is everyone confused by this turn of events, they're also confused why the other party is also here. Once Kiryu says he was told to come here at 1 AM, Kawara pulls out his gun and points it at one of the Kazukis. He isn't going to let the fake Kazuki's plan of leading them all up here, killing them, and making it look like a dispute between all 4 of them succeed. Date tries to stop Kawara because he doesn't want to risk what Kawara then confirms is, yes, I'm only using my instincts and gut feeling that this is the fake Kazuki. And you want to know what my favorite part of this whole sequence is? Kawara is fucking wrong. This is also where I start to not like the model swap for him either. The new one isn't bad, but I feel like it lost that unhinged look that the original had to him. The guy is fucking mental and has a clear disregard for human life if he thinks they're bad. That disheveled appearance with the menacing look to his face really plays this up. The new one, which is based off of his voice actor, just looks like your goofy grandpa. His model does come off more smug at times, which I do think works in Kawara's favor in some scenes, but overall I think the original was probably the better one for the character. Date shoots at the fake Kazuki, but only grazes his forehead and freezes up, unable to kill him. They are all only saved because Sayama ran upstairs when she heard the first gunshots. The cops have shown up downstairs, and since we don't have the time to explain what has exactly happened here, Sayama then buys us some time by keeping the cops distracted so we can slip away and rush Kazuki to the doctor we met from the doctor's duty sub-story in the first game. We hurry Kazuki into the operating room, and Dr. Emoto says that it's going to take a while. Kiryu and Date decide to head to Bantam to catch up and share notes as to why exactly they were on the roof of the Amano building. Date is surprised when Kiryu brings up Besho, as he used to be on the Kamurocho PD with Date before moving to Osaka. He and Kawara were the golden boys of the force, called Besho the Viper and Kawara the Devil. Date tagged along during Kawara's investigation in hope of picking up a few things since he was still new at the time, but things quickly went south and Date lost all respect for the man when apprehending the suspects for murder that were illegal aliens. When they would resist, he would shoot back at them and kill them all. Date sees firing back as a last resort when all else fails, but Kawara is completely blasé about the whole thing and says nothing could have been done, it was us or them. This wasn't a one-time occurrence either. Anytime they were going after illegal aliens, this would end up as the result, and it was always brushed off in self-defense. Eventually, everyone started calling him Killer Kawara and was bumped from Division 1. Date remarks that Kawara clearly has some deep-seated trauma that he won't open up about and is what is driving him forward. It isn't simply that he is racist and wants to kill every Korean perp he runs into, even if on the surface that's what it comes off as. Whatever his reason may be, this is what drives him into this lonesome dark path, which again I think his original design fits perfectly compared to Susumu Terajima. As we leave Bantam, we get a call from Sayama, who is looking for us at the clinic. Since she doesn't know the town, it would be easier for us to go to her and bring her back to Bantam. While Kiryu is on the way, we see Sayama and Kawara interact, and Kawara acts oddly familiar with her, telling her that smoking is bad for her and that she shouldn't do it, and needs to act more ladylike. But before Sayama can really respond and this conversation goes anywhere, Kiryu shows up. Emoto is still in surgery working on Kazuki when two dudes in black show up and start talking to him in Korean. Once they find out that the dead Kazuki on the roof was their comrade, they try to leave before being stopped by Sayama, and they sucker punch her in the face. Kiryu, being the guy that he is, isn't going to let anyone disrespect women in his presence, so he beats the ever-loving shit out of them. Kawara puts his gun to one of their heads and demands to know who they are working for, or he'll blow their brain out. They say the word Jingwoo before the cop sirens can be heard, and the gang leaves the clinic to meet back up at Bantam. Kawara breaks down the word to the others and reveals that these guys are working for the Korean Jingwoo Mafia. The thing that this mafia cares the most about is absolute loyalty. Their motto is death before dishonor. Now that we know who has taken Daigo and the chairman captive, Date suggests that we leave the bar and find a new place to speak, as the barkeeper Tobe has been acting odd and Date found these pictures behind the counter. Kiryu says he's going to stay behind and confront Tobe about the meaning of all this. When he asks Tobe what's going on, the rest of the bar staff rush through the door wielding weapons and say, "Sorry Kiryu, we don't want to do this, but please let us kill you." For as serious and sad of a scene this is, it results in one of the funniest shots in the entire series. After beating them, Tobe reveals that because of the shooting at the bar last year when we met Haruka, it has resulted in the bar's popularity dying out almost completely. Tobe is out of money with no customers and no bank is willing to give him a loan, resulting in him having to go to the Yakuza for dirty money. As we all know how that plays out, the interest rates skyrocket and they are massively in debt until a man approaches them saying that if he kills Kiryu, they'll cover their debts in full, no question asked. Kiryu isn't mad about this. If anything, he just looks hurt knowing that this isn't really their fault. They've been put into an impossible situation, backed into a corner, and it's partially his fault. One of the coolest things about this moment is the fact that it happens in general. They could have easily at the end of Yakuza 1 just gone, and then everything worked out. Kinda like how it appeared to be with the bar reopening partway through the game under a new name, which is when you befriended Tobe by helping the boxer being forced to throw the fight. Moments like this show that those events leave lasting scars on everyone affected by them, even if you don't realize it, which starts to become a reoccurring thing in this game. This scene also reaffirms one of the other main themes of the game. You can't run away from these problems and pretend they don't exist. That will only make them fester and become worse. This was introduced in the beginning when talking to Daigo in the alley, that Kiryu ran away from the Tojo and his responsibility of being the fourth chairman, and as a result, look at where the clan is now, dying on its last leg with over half of the members in a single family threatening to break off when they're on the brink of an all-out war with the Omi Alliance. Now Kiryu has to face the consequences of his actions, with his world slowly falling apart around him, not knowing who he can trust as those close to him are being forced to turn against him. Kiryu is done running away. He promises Tobe that he will fix everything and not to worry, he just needs him to hold out a little bit longer. With that, we head back to Serena where everyone is looking dour. Date reveals that he is now wanted as a suspect for the murder of the fake Kazuki, which the police think is the real one. We jump to Sudo at the police headquarters discussing the footage used to incriminate Date. They try to fight it to show his innocence, but the higher-ups aren't having it. If this gets out that an ex-cop is going around with a firearm working on a secret police case, it would be a PR nightmare, so they are basically throwing Date under the bus to save their asses. Slight nitpicking tangent that doesn't really affect anything, but it is funny hearing all of this after seeing the super crisp video shown in Kiwami 2, which you can clearly see Date's gun doesn't move and the bullet clearly comes from a right angle, so there is no way that his gun could have done it, even if it did fire and the camera somehow didn't catch it. Kurahashi says that he will try to think of something to clear Date's name, and back at the bar, Kawara further confirms that even if the video has too many holes in it to reliably use as evidence, it's more so to cover their asses in case of a PR disaster, and that there is a massive flaw with the police using camera footage for everything these days when it shouldn't be the be-all end-all of incrimination. Since we have an idea of who took Daigo but no leads, it's time for us to go and give the florist a little visit. He apologizes for what is happening to Date say, as he would have never let evidence that shaky be sent off if it passed his desk. It turns out he has a rat problem. While they may be watching Kamurocho 24/7, the florist has to sleep at some point, which leaves an opening for those to do what they want with the information they collect. Though he doesn't know who the rat could be, as all of the guys working for him now are friends from his days in purgatory. As they are about to find out where Daigo is, the power is cut. There are guys in ski masks attacking the generators in the basement. When we go to stop them, we run into a familiar face. It's Hayashi, the guy who attacked us in Ares in Yakuza 1. He's no longer with the Omi proper anymore, but he says he will do whatever it takes to get Ryuji to the top. This results in a pretty sick boss fight against him. After we beat Hayashi and restore the power, we find out that Daigo is being kept in Shangri-La. Since the incident last year where Majima drove a truck through the front door, the place has become condemned. Kiryu decides to go in alone first since there is a possibility that the building might collapse. So now we have to fight our way through who we assume are the Go-Ryu clan. Thankfully, Daigo is safe and sound, just starving from being left in this room for the whole time. Back at the bar, Kashiwagi is waiting for us and we inform him that it was the Jingwu Mafia who abducted the chairman and Daigo. Kashiwagi is surprised by this since the Jingwu Mafia were supposed to have been wiped out over 20 years ago. Sayama is confused how there are no records of this mafia if they were supposedly so prolific. Kashiwagi says the reason why there are no police records is because the police themselves made sure to erase everything. Back in the day, the Jingwu Mafia was a massive problem, causing all sorts of violent crimes to innocent people, but since they were working in the shadows unlike the Yakuza, it was impossible for the cops to actually deal with them. This is where the Dojima family enters the picture. They weren't the major powerhouse of the Tojo at this point like we are so used to them being. In order to expand to greatness, the Dojima family had to take out all other foreign mafias taking root in Kamurocho. That included the Jingwu Mafia. This meant for an all-out extermination of their members. Kazama is against this idea and asks Dojima if there is any other way to go about doing this, and while Dojima sees where he's coming from, the Jingwu are different. If they let these guys live, they're digging their own grave. So Kazama and Shimano raid their hideout and kill everyone, or at least that's what they initially thought. The Jingwu Mafia was a gang of 36 members, but only 33 bodies were found that night, so it seems that some of them made an escape and are coming back now for revenge. The police knew all of this was going down, but since they had no way of stopping the Jingwu Mafia, they simply looked the other way and pretended that nothing ever happened. Tomorrow is Terada's funeral, so we're gonna turn in for the night. We're gonna need all the energy we can because the Go-Ryu and the Jingwu Mafia can strike at any time. And sure enough, during the service, Go-Ryu thugs storm the courtyard and try to tear the place up. This fight looks so fucking good on the PlayStation 2. I always harp on about how the original games look their best when they're in inclement weather, and here there is an absolute downpour accompanied by thunder and lightning. Ryuji finally shows up and apologizes for his boy's actions. He says when they get wound up, it's hard to contain them. Ryuji's here to pay his respects to Terada since he did right by him as a kid and thinks funerals are something sacred and shouldn't be messed with. But also, he is here to talk shit. When arguing with Yayoi, he reveals that he and Jin Goda aren't related by blood. The only thing they share is a mutual hatred for each other. He leaves off telling Kiryu that he'll give the Tojo a 3-day mourning period. After that, they better be ready to be hit with everything they got. He also remarks how the uncouth bastard Sengoku most likely won't show this respect, and in fact is probably in Kamurocho wreaking havoc as we speak. And sure enough, he is mobilizing his entire army down Nakamichi Street, but little did they know that there was someone waiting for them at the end. By the time that Kiryu has gotten back into town, Majima has beaten them all, but he's seriously hurt. His face is so bloody and swollen. Before he passes out, he tells Kiryu this was all a diversion to get him out of the HQ. Shindo has sold the clan out to the Omi, and once Kiryu gets back to Tojo HQ, he finds tons of guys sprawled out in the courtyard. The Nishikiyama family has taken over the building and is holding everybody hostage in the meeting room.
Interim chairwoman, Yayoi Dojima's pussy got me acting unwise. Betray the Tojo, I must.
そして俺は姉さんを手にするんだ!
This is one of the few fights that is actually improved in some cases from the Dragon Engine, since it is now a seamless fight instead of having load screens. Shindo is a pretty persistent bastard, but Daigo finishes him off by shooting him. Back in Archive Room 13, Date is going through the old case files of the Jingwu Mafia. Kawara joins him and reveals that he was the cop that worked on the case along with Besho. This is why he was a part of the secret investigation of Kazuki. He throws Date his badge and tells him his work here is done and the rest is up to him before walking off. Now that we know that Besho is a part of the Jingwu Mafia case, Sayama wants to confront him for lying to her, so we'll have to go back to Osaka once she finishes getting ready. Since we have some time to kill, we walk around town, and what do you know? It's Takashi, the florist's son that we helped in the previous game. Kiryu realizes the woman he's with isn't Kyoka and starts to get mad, saying that all the stuff he promised in the first game was nothing but hot air, and Takashi in the end is just another punk. He begs Kiryu to listen to his story because he's got it all wrong. Since the events of the last game, Takashi has been bouncing from job to job, unable to keep one steady long enough before he quits due to differences with the staff and how they are treating him, or just ends up getting fired. He says that he's been busting his ass trying to keep a good steady job, but Kyoka is off with another man. He caught her in a lie, and one of his previous co-workers told him he saw her enter a hotel with an older man. Of course, Takashi didn't go to confirm this himself or even confront her about it, again, like Kiryu running away from his problems. He asks us to help him get in contact with the legendary information dealer, so he can find out for sure what is going on behind his back. So we go to ask Florist to meet with him, but he's less than keen on the idea, thinks the kid is pathetic, doesn't even want to look at him, sees him as a spineless wimp, traits Takashi didn't get from him. Eventually we get him to meet Takashi, but not as his father, instead in a professional setting as the florist. Yeah, who's running away from their problems now, Takashi tells the florist he needs to know what Kyoka is doing. The florist asks him if he really wants to know. Some things in this world are better off not knowing. Are you sure you won't regret this? He tells them that he needs to know no matter what. Initially, the footage looks really incriminating. She's meeting someone who she talked to over the phone, saying that they're safe since Takashi is out right now. She goes to a hotel. Takashi starts to break down and says he can't take it anymore, but Florist tells him that this was his request and he needs to see it through. Then we see who she's been meeting with. It's her dad, Patriarch Otobe. This entire time, he's been secretly supporting them by giving Kyoka money to get by. Her dad still thinks that Takashi is a loser and she's too good for him, but she reaffirms that she believes in him, that he will land a stable job, and once he does, they'll pay back her father no matter how long it takes. Takashi thanks them and says that while they probably think that he's just blowing more hot air, he promises to work as hard as he can to do right by Kyoka. Before we leave, Takashi asks the florist if he could find out about his father. Florist tells him that his fee is way more than he can afford, and to come back once he can support himself and Kyoka. Kiryu jokes with the florist after Takashi leaves the room, commenting on how he never does pro bono. Now I want to take a moment to go on a small tangent. For the Yakuza 1 video, I debated for quite a while when making it about cutting the discussion of Chapter 6. Initially, I thought it wasn't that important in the grand scheme of what I was trying to do and say. It was something that I would be able to remove to make sure the video wasn't needlessly long. For those who watched that video know that I ended up leaving it in, not only because these characters come back in Yakuza 2 and in later games, but because their stories are a lot more important than they initially seem. You wouldn't be wrong to initially write these two sections off as some filler between the lulls of conflict in both games, but in reality they are actually way more important than I initially gave them credit for. Just think about what was said here. Wouldn't it be better not knowing? Don't you think you might regret it? Needing to know no matter what, and that they can take it. No more running away. They mirror Kiryu's narrative and sow the seeds of the greater message and what Kiryu's arc is all about. Yakuza 1's chapter is literally called Fatherhood. It couldn't have been more obvious if it tried. Fatherhood is arguably the most important theme of the entire series. It makes sense given the context of Nagoshi's relationship with his father and how it drove him to make the original game. This isn't told in just one way either. It actually manages to show a new and fresh perspective of it with each game. From accepting the responsibility of and what it means to watch over those you love, to the sins of our fathers and the generational traumas that they cause and leave behind once they are gone. Examining and exploring fatherhood both in the context of the parent to child, child to parent, and more ways that I can't really get into without talking about the future games and their spoilers, so we'll just have to keep that theme of fatherhood in the back of your mind for now. That is why I knew I couldn't cut talking about these two chapters. They are simply too important in showing Kiryu the man he has to be and or become, even if at the moment he or the player doesn't realize it. We head back to Serena, where Sayama is pretty mad. She feels betrayed by Besho for never telling her he worked in Kamurocho. She felt he was the only person who really understood her and had her back, but in reality, he's making deals with the Yakuza to have gangs be eliminated. Next stop is Osaka PD headquarters. Kiryu says while she does that, he's going to look for Chairman Gota, but Sayama is done with letting Kiryu run around freely. She reminds him that he is still in police protective custody, so he's coming with her. Once she starts interrogating Besho, he gives her very reasonable answers. Sure, he knew the Jingwu back 20 plus years ago, but he did not bring them up now because he didn't think there was any reason they would be connected. Anything they are doing now is completely unknown to him. The reason he didn't tell Sayama about any of this is because it's not like he's gonna go around telling people classified top secret information. It's classified for a reason. He does fill in some of the blanks we have about the Jingwu and tells us to find a place called Keima. A man named Mirai can be found there. He is one of the 3 survivors of the Tojo raid. He also tells Sayama that her protective custody job ends here. It is far too dangerous at this point if the Jingwu are involved. She protests and asks if this is because she is a woman, which Besho tells her the Jingwu aren't your average gang. She only sees them as just another bad guy because she never knew how scary they were in their prime. They were monsters killing women and children if they had to. Sayama gets upset and storms out the room. Besho bows and asks Kiryu to keep her safe, he's the only one who can. Kiryu also has a question of his own for Besho before he leaves. He wants to know if Kawara's shootings and getting transferred down to Kansai were connected to the Tojo Jingwu massacre. Besho says he can't say any more than he already has and takes his leave. Now we have to find where Sayama ran off to. She wasn't at her mom's bar, but Tamio mentions that she frequents one of the other bars on the other side of town. The bartender says we just missed her as she left down the boardwalk, where she is now trying to stop some thugs harassing a couple. Kiryu steps in and quickly deals with these guys, and before the local cops can come over and question us, Kiryu and Sayama run off to have a date montage, and it's great, ending off with them drinking beer on the roof and having a good back and forth.
あんたって不思議な人やね。本当にヤクザやったのが信じられへん。
だから言ったろ。人から見た印象なんてその程度のものだってことだ。
They call it for the night, but Kiryu decides to walk around town for a bit before heading back to Aoi. While we are walking down the boardwalk, we see an old man about to throw a piece of paper with a tattoo design on it into the river. Kiryu stops the old man and asks him if he is sure he won't regret throwing it away. Kiryu can tell just by looking at it that this isn't your average tattoo design. The old man asks him if he's in the business, and Kiryu says, yeah, something like that. The old man then invites us for some tea. He gives the piece to one of his pupils and tells her to put it somewhere where it won't be found. The man finally introduces himself. He is Kazuhori IV, master tattoo artist of the Kansai region. Kiryu has actually heard of him before from Master Utabori, which Kazuhori is surprised that Kiryu has a piece done by the legendary Utabori himself. Kiryu asks why he was about to throw that piece away. Kazuhori reveals the design is passed down through the generations. Only the acting Kazuhori is allowed to use it. It is of the golden dragon that lords over the four gods. Right as he's about to get to the reason why he did this, we hear a scream from his pupil Akina. She runs into the room and says that Satoshi, Kazuhori's other pupil, stole the design and ran off with it. This fighting over the succession of the Kazuhori name and the dragon's design is the reason why he tried to get rid of it. Kazuhori wants to retire soon and plans to pick Akina as his successor, but the world of tattoo artists is a sexist one. Satoshi especially won't accept this outcome as she is 10 years younger than him and a woman, but Kazuhori affirms that being a master tattoo artist is more than mere years of experience and gender. You have to be able to see the fates of clients through your works, and Satoshi simply isn't at that level yet. The other issue is that Akina won't inherit the name for some unknown reason that she won't say. But now that Satoshi has stolen the dragon, he will call himself Kazuhori V regardless. This is where Kiryu decides he's going to get the dragon back. When asked why, he says the design reminds him of his. Both of them instantly realize that means he carries Utabori's last dragon, his magnum opus. He hasn't painted a dragon since. Utabori taught Kiryu the weight of tattoos and its worth. Seeing Satoshi clearly disrespect this is something that he cannot stand by and let happen. Once we find Satoshi, we start to see what Kazuhori meant when he said Satoshi wasn't ready to be a master yet. To put it bluntly, the man is shallow. All he can see is the fame and financial gain from being Kazuhori. Nor does he get/care about the mysticism and the spirituality of it. These tattoos mean something to those who bear them. There is a weight to getting something this significant on your body. I love how tattoos are treated in this series. There is just such a respect and love for the art form. The way I see it, it is very similar to something that I really care about, and that is preserving the original experience with games. It's why I try to play games on their original hardware with original releases, trying to get as picture accurate as devices like the RetroTink 5X or the FrameMeister can get me. Recently, I bought the G-Comp switchers so I can plug old consoles into a CRT and also feed the game to the RetroTink and to my capture card at the same time, meaning I get to see the game how it was supposed to look on an interlace analog TV while also capturing the highest quality image accurate picture possible. I want to dispel the idea behind the term "it looks like a PlayStation 2 game." Everyone enjoys to occasionally point their finger and laugh at bad CGI or bad looking modern games that are way more expensive than their visuals should portray. I want to show people that no, PlayStation 2 games did and still do look very good. Just because you saw shitty emulation footage or just because you saw some 360p gameplay that someone captured on their VCR VCR that was uploaded 10 years ago doesn't mean that's an accurate depiction of how those games look. And despite my best efforts with this, what you're going to see in videos isn't even going to be 100% accurate to what I'm capturing, due to YouTube's built-in compression. I already know it's going to be ruining aspects of this video, like where I complained about the shadows and ambient occlusion effects in Kiwami 2. I've done test uploads of this video, and the YouTube's compression, despite uploading a 1080p video, completely masks this. My Fatal Frame video was also massively ruined by this. Fatal Frame 1 and 2's static noise filters look terrible in the video, but in reality, they look amazing. I genuinely think there is something very important about the original experience with games that I don't want to be lost. It's something that I think should and needs to be preserved. Remasters and ports are nice and all, don't get me wrong. I want games to be as accessible as humanly possible, but often remakes and remasters introduce issues that weren't there in the original. While fixed now, the original visuals of Halo 1 in the Anniversary Collection were fucked up for years with missing effects. That isn't preserving the original when it actively doesn't look like it. People, myself included, before I found out about this issue went, wow, Halo 1 looks a lot worse than I remember, but it didn't. It didn't look like this. Look at the Silent Hill HD collection. It's still the only way to buy these games without dropping a shit ton of money. Some of the most important games ever fucking made before taxes at the time of writing this will cost you at least at the cheapest $400 to own the original trilogy. That's not even including needing a PlayStation 2 and having a TV that can actually have it plugged into, which every TV that I've seen on the shelves at stores recently doesn't have component or composite inputs, so then you need to spend another $300 to buy a RetroTink 5X whenever they're back in stock, or hunt down a CRT. Emulation is great. I will always champion it as a way to make games accessible when they aren't otherwise, but it isn't a replacement as emulation isn't perfect. It's getting there, but it also brings its own issues and errors. There is a bunch of games that just don't emulate very well. And just like seen with Satoshi, there will be people who do not care and don't get it and don't want to try to get it, which is fine. But just because the average person might not, doesn't mean these things shouldn't be treated with respect and given the care they deserve to be preserved, which sadly isn't the case for this game or Yakuza 1. I mentioned at the end of my Yakuza 1 video that these two games don't really feel like they're getting the respect and treatment they deserve. You can't buy either of them digitally, but in Sega's defense they did do a limited reprint of Yakuza 1 through 4 back in 2017, which as a result has kept these games cheap on sites like eBay, and I think more companies should be doing this. Hey Square Enix, you already sell a bunch of retro games of yours on your website, even if it's tucked away in a place that the average user will never find unless they're really digging for it. Why not re-release games like Xenogears? I would like to own a copy physically, but I don't feel like paying $150 for one. But at the end of the day, Sega's main push is the Kiwamis, which I understand why. They're a business, and these are the easier to access versions of these stories, even if they are inferior. But I think the thing that bothers me the most is how I see fans treat these games. It's one thing to just think that the Kiwamis are far more convenient and you don't want to go through the hassle, or that you just frankly like them better for whatever reason. I think that's perfectly fine. It's the people I see scoff at the idea of playing them, and those who claim people like me who believe the originals are better are just blinded by nostalgia, that we are being overly nitpicky when saying that the Kiwamis do not match the vibes of the original, especially with color shifts and music or lack thereof, that the games aren't as good and aren't as good looking as we claim they are. This issue isn't even unique to this franchise, it's an issue with the industry as a whole. So many people can't even conceive the idea of playing old games and beg in their replies to game studios and developer tweets to remake games. Hell, the guy who's running Sony doesn't understand the idea of why people would even want to play older games. While editing this section of the video, Scott Miller, one of the founders of Apogee, creators of Duke Nukem, said in their Duke Nukem Forever post that they hoped that Gearbox would resurrect Duke Nukem at some point. It seems like the obvious move would be to recreate Duke Nukem 3D using Unreal Engine 5, which is probably the most out of touch and tone deaf thing I think I've heard in a while. Nobody wants to play a Duke Nukem 3D that's not in the build engine. The build engine is one of the massive appeals of Duke Nukem 3D. Just remaking the game using a photorealistic art style with high fidelity graphics that are super top of the line for the current year would be completely missing the point of the game, and is why Duke Nukem Forever and 3D Realms died the way it did. From my perspective, this sentiment was at its worst when Sony initially announced that they were shutting down the PS3 store before enough people made a large enough of a stink that they ended up backing down. In a hypothetical defense, there could have just been a lot of of people just wanting to argue for the sake of arguing, and they don't actually care or think that, which, you know, is also a problem, but, you know, not this one. Don't even get me started on the we need a Kiwami 3 bullshit. I'll get to that soon enough. Here is my atomic hot take. Most games do not need remakes, especially the ones that are actively getting them. When was the last time a bad game got a remake into a good one? I couldn't fucking tell ya. When are we getting a Daikatana remake that takes the good ideas and the overly ambitious ones and puts them into a game that isn't whack? Instead of getting remakes with worse combat, worse progression, worse boss fights, having missing effects or far less dynamic cinematics compared to a game from 20 years ago, with weird art direction choices having missing or replaced music that doesn't match the tone of the original and doesn't have one of the 3 main areas of a game. What I don't want you to take away from this rant is that this is some elitist mentality bullshit where I'm saying,
you didn't really play the game if you didn't play it on original hardware on a CRT, blah 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 blah.
All I want is for people to be more open-minded and try some new games even if they are old or if you might think they look bad. There is so much good stuff out there waiting to be played and experienced. Your next favorite might be out there right in front of you, but if you have this narrow-minded view, then it might pass you by, and that would be a shame. I want these games to be accessible to people when they want to try them. Nothing is more demoralizing than seeing someone who's actively interested in broadening their horizons and then realizing, oh, I can't easily actually access the thing I want to experience. I also want games to actually be properly preserved, because most of the time they're not, and that is a huge problem, but it's not like anybody who's watching this video really has the power to do so. It's just me yelling at the clouds, wanting a better future. I know I just went on a long-winded tangent, but let's get back on track where we left off confronting Satoshi. Satoshi still can't fully grasp the tattoo beyond the shallow monetary gain. His hands have learned the techniques, but he has remained hollow, which makes him burst out in anger back at Kazahori, as if he has any ground to stand on with the last guy he gave the dragon to. It turns out it's none other than Ryuji Goda, and it's a perfect fit for him, honestly. The golden dragon Huanlong ruled over the 4 gods of the cardinal directions, one of them being Qinglong the Azure Dragon, like the one on Kiryu's back. In further parallels with Ryuji's ambitions, he wants to rule over all of Japan's criminal underworld. He isn't satisfied with just Kansai. He must lord over all of the land like the golden dragon does. Akina finally speaks up to stop Satoshi's insults at their master, as she was the one who inked the dragon on Ryuji's back. Kazahori met Ryuji 10 years ago, and at first sight, he knew that he would make his finest canvas. But when it came time to ink the family's dragon, his hands were unable to move, so Akina took his place. Since then, she has learned the weight of giving someone a tattoo. After receiving the dragon, Ryuji climbed the ranks of the Omi and is fighting for the top. The man he became scared her, and is the reason why she won't take the title of Kazahori the Fifth.
これがあのダブリさんの竜。
俺はこの竜を背負ってから多くのものを得て多くのものを失った。だが俺は竜を掘ったことも今の自分があるのもすべて運命だったと思ってる。あんたたちがゴーダ龍二に掘ったのは間違いじゃない。
桐生さん、
力を持った人間はよく道を間違える。だから人間なんだ。だがその道を正すのはあんたたちの仕事じゃない。あんたたち堀氏には掘った男の顛末を見届けることしかできない。秋名さん、もしあんたに堀師としての責任があるなら風堀を継承して龍二の行く末を見届けるべきなんじゃないのか。
桐生さん、
それじゃあな。
桐生さん、私もう逃げません。5代目風堀を継ぎます。ありがとうございました。
It's time to meet up with Sayama on the bridge. She looks worried as she tells us that she has come to the realization that she might be one of the Jingwu survivors. If her parents were killed by the Tojo 20 plus years ago like Tamio said on the phone, then that does line up nicely with the raid on the Jingwu compound, and why her mother and Besho would try to keep her in the dark about it. While she is scared to learn the truth, she still chooses to march forward. So now we are off to the Shinsaicho district based off of the Shinseki district in real life. Remember a few minutes ago during my tangent about preserving the original experience and how Kiwami 2 didn't bring back one of the sections? Shinsaicho is that section. Chapter 11 has been awkwardly grafted on and reworked into Sotenbori in Kiwami 2. Now I could understand where some can come from when they say that Shinsaicho isn't that big of an exclusion. It's just a small strip you go to once, and while they aren't wrong, I think the vibes of this place are immaculate. I would love to have seen this area in the Dragon Engine, but I imagine with the tight deadline they had, something had to give, and this area is in only one game and never used again, so they wouldn't want to spend the time, money, and effort to make it for only this game. They do this with a few other locations in the game too, like the cutscene where Date tells you that Besho and Kawara worked on the Jingwu case back in the day. In the original, they're on the docks, but in Kiwami 2, it's on the roof of Serena. Whatever the reason may be that we'll probably never know unless it's said in an interview sometime down the line, it is one of the many things that compound to make Kiwami 2 the inferior game in my eyes. In Shinsaicho, there's an acupuncture clinic that you can go to relearn some old moves. It's time to get the tiger drop back. To get information on where Keima is, we have to beat some old dude at Shogi. Thankfully, the devs let us cheat by talking to a guy across the hall, and if you pay him, he'll say to tell the old man his wife is looking for him. And while he's panicked not looking, you can swap the board around so you're in check. He tells us there's a statue nearby that tourists donate to. There is a homeless man who helps himself to that money. He used to work at Keima, so he'll point them in the right direction. The homeless guy runs away when we confront him, and then he tries to fight us after we catch up. He tells us to go into the tower and use the binoculars that have a yellow sticker on it. The binoculars point to a billboard with a phone number. When we call it, there is a question asking how many steps there are in the tower. Answering 503, we get an order to ask for at the restaurant down the block. Once we place the order and are given the food, Kiryu finds a shogi piece mixed in with his. This is our ticket inside. Kiwami 2, on the other hand, changes up the events to now fit into the Sotenbori streets, since there isn't the prayer statue nor is there the tower. You talk to the same old dude playing shogi, but instead you have to pay him 30,000 yen for the information, then go to a building where you find a flyer on the front door which has a number to call, and instead of needing to know the number of steps in the tower, you need to know the 3 sizes of a porn star. I think the changes are charming enough at first, but then it becomes kinda tedious as you have to fight the old dude now because he's trying to get the shogi piece off you, and then you have to find Rudolph to guide you, which involves you talking to all the marked NPCs on the map and fighting them until you find the right one. Sayama confronts Mirai and asks him to tell her what happened that night. He says that she has managed to live her life this far without knowing. She's better off keeping it that way, but she is insistent on discovering the truth. Remember, the Jingwu's creed is death before dishonor, so the clan from the mainland did not like that Mirai tried to live a normal life after escaping, so he quote-unquote sold them out. The 2 other survivors were 2 16-year-old boys. He doesn't know how they survived or where they are now, simply that they made it out that night. The people he sold out were the other 2 survivors of that night, the boss's wife and child. As a result, the boss's wife was killed, leaving the child orphaned. She then demands to know who killed her father. He says he doesn't know the man's name, but he does remember his mustache, which Kiryu instantly knew had to be none other than Kazama. She asks him if he's 100% certain, and he says yes because he was there that night. Before she could ask him what he meant by that, the shogi parlor is raided by Jingwu assassins. After Kiryu beats them, he picks one of them up by the throat and demands to know where Chairman Goda is being kept, but the assassin takes cyanide hidden in his ring. The other assassins follow suit, but one of them throws a knife that stabs Mirai in the stomach before said assassin starts to cough up blood and dies. Before Mirai dies, he tells Sayama that he'll tell her mother that her daughter was brought up right. Then he stabs the knife deeper into his stomach to seal his fate. We are now at the boardwalk, and Kiryu starts to explain himself as to why he was at the raid that night. Since it was Christmas, Kazama usually showed up at the orphanage to spend time with them, but he didn't show up this time. Kiryu began to worry, so he snuck out to Kamurocho to find him, and when he did, Kazama was acting funny. Little did he know that Kazama was not only sent to kill the Jingwu, but he was also going to defy Dojima's orders and let them get away on the condition that they never show their faces ever in Kamurocho again. Kiryu followed him to the compound but couldn't hear the actual conversation going on in the room, so when he saw the Jingwu leader pointing a gun at Kazama, all he could think about was having to save him. So he ran in with a pipe and ended up ruining everything because the leader thought he was with the Tojo and was going to shoot at him if Kazama didn't first. It's too late to go back now as Shimano is mowing down members left and right. This is the first and honestly only time in the series that ever frames Kiryu in a light like this. Sure, it was a tragic accident of unfortunate circumstances, but he is responsible for the deaths of the Jingbu in the end. This is Kiryu at his lowest point we've ever seen him. He just stands there in the rain with Sayama's words echoing in his head over and over again. This scene is so fucking amazing in the original and is completely ruined in Kiwami 2. I'm going to assume they couldn't get the rights back to the Crazy Ken Band song that played during this scene. I hope that's the case and that they didn't replace the song simply because they thought the newer one was better. I like Sim. I've listened to a decent amount of them for a period in high school and I really like their anime OPs, but this song does not fit this scene at all. It's one thing to not be able to get the rights back to the original song, but why not stick with jazz? Why switch it to a pop rock or whatever the fuck you want to consider this? So it turns out I can't show an example of this song at all, thanks to the lovely people over at who are the most trigger-happy content ID senders that I've ever experienced. You can ask any of your favorite YouTubers and they have definitely had their experiences with this company, because even if your example falls within the legal amount of time you're allotted to show, they don't give a shit. So I'm just going to be talking over it right now and hope that you can hear the example while still being able to trick this dogshit system that YouTube refuses to fix. Music aside, there is also this terrible stabbing stock sound effect used here, when it was completely silent in the original. I haven't really brought it up yet, but the sound design in Kiwami 2 is fucking terrible. The original Yakuza 2 had its fair share of hilariously bad and overused sound library effects like I showed at the beginning, but everything in this game just sounds off. Gunshot sound effects are by far the worst offender of this in the jump from the original to the remake. It seems the blade might have been poisoned too. The bleeding won't stop. We have to hurry back and get to the bar before we bleed out. I always thought it would have been a cool little thematical touch to not have your heat be able to build at any point during the fights in this sequence since you are gravely injured. Thankfully, we managed to get through the front door before collapsing. Now we cut to the Omi officers talking in Sengoku's office. Ryuji and Sengoku are on thin ice with each other, but Sengoku reveals he has already won this race to the chairman's seat, as he has one of his boys bring in a tied-up Haruka. With her captured, he will use her as bait to have Kiryu killed trying to save her. When Kiryu comes to, he finds that there was a note put into his pocket by the guy who stabbed him. Now he knows they have Haruka and he has to save her, body be damned. We run to Kurakawa for some information and he says he'll get back to us once he finds something. After we run around town for a bit, we get a call from a blocked number telling us to meet them at the golf range. Of course, it's an assassin waiting to try and kill us, but he didn't put up much of a fight. When asked who hired him, he says that he got the job through a website, so it was completely anonymous. Then we get a call from Kurakawa saying he has news for us and to meet him on the boardwalk. It turns out he was the one who hired the guy at the golf course. He tells us, "No hard feelings, Kiryu, but you turned into a giant pile of cash right before my eyes." Then Kurakawa opens the console command to make dudes materialize out of thin air, and once we beat them, Kurakawa says that Haruka is being kept in Osaka Castle. Now it's time for the hypest set piece in the entire game. This section is so fucking cool, having you fight your way to the top of the castle. You're fighting dudes coming out of the walls as ninjas, others donning samurai armor, dodging spike traps, and has a turret section, then finishes off fighting 2 tigers at the same time. Keep in mind, Kiryu does all of this after just suffering from a near-fatal stab wound. The least surprising thing about all this is once you take care of all of his boys, Sengoku is a total coward. He has no real strength or power, because he uses his money to surround himself with strong people rather than being strong himself. And as a result, Ryuji comes in and kills the guy. He gives Kiryu Haruka back and tells him that he has 2 days before he will invade Kamurocho, so be ready. Ryuji may be an evil motherfucker, but he does not like underhanded tactics and dragging children into this. He wants to fight on equal footing. It doesn't mean shit if you have to do scummy things to overcome a powerful foe. As the adrenaline starts to wear off and his wounds reopen, Kiryu collapses, but Sayama shows up to help Haruka and takes him out of the building. Once we get back to the bar, Sayama finds a note left from her mother saying that her real father is still alive and not to blame Kiryu. With the wound fully patched up, we decide to take Haruka around town for a bit as she's never been to Sotenbori before. A president of a talent agency spots Haruka on the street and rushes over trying to sign her, asking if she wants to be a superstar. In his eyes, she is a one-in-a-century type star waiting to be made, but she isn't interested. He talks to Kiryu and puts his number in our phone, and we go on our merry way. Eventually, he gives us a call since he memorized Kiryu's number when he put his into Kiryu's contact list. He wants to discuss Haruka's potential future one more time down at his office. We have Haruka wait for us outside, which seems like a fucking terrible idea to have a 10-year-old child wait for you on the side of a street alone in an area they aren't from and don't know. With the president's offer, he wants to treat Haruka like royalty. She will get all of the best training, the healthiest meals, the best education in a prestigious school in a safe environment with protection from Yakuza types. That last sentence really stung Kiryu. Because of him, Haruka has been kidnapped 4 times now in the past year, and while he initially respected her wish, he starts to believe that maybe it's best for her future to be far away from him, removed from any possible future danger. As Kiryu is about to sign the papers, what do you know, having an unattended small child in a backroad street that we know and just saw is sleazy wasn't a good idea. After we beat up these guys, Haruka finds out about signing her future away without her consent, and is understandably very mad. She begins to yell at Kiryu, and again, here is another scene where the 3 major themes of the game are present. Fatherhood, with Kiryu wanting what's best for Haruka, what happens when you aren't forthcoming, and how that can cause a rift between those close to you, and not running away from your problems, with simply trying to send Haruka away to a place he sees as safe so she isn't anywhere near him to be in harm's way. She doesn't want to be without him anymore, and has never been scared because she always knew he would be there to protect her, and if he was to send her away now, she would simply follow him on her own to Kamurocho and find her way back to him by herself. The producer is upset that his next star is walking away with so much potential, but we do him a solid and introduce him to a waitress from the local bar who has an amazing singing voice. He ends up signing her, and later in the game when talking to Haruka, she will show you a paper about how they've become a successful singer. That's enough roaming around town for now. It's time to head back to the bar, where we get a call from Kurahashi, who says that he has Date hostage and to meet him at the Millennium Tower with Sayama by sunrise. On the drive over, Haruka and Sayama get a chance to have an actual conversation with each other for the first time. Haruka remarks how Kiryu must really like Sayama since he acts the same way around her as he does with Haruka. He doesn't have to be the deific legend that is the Dragon of Dojima. He doesn't have to be that protector of those around him. He can just be himself because Sayama is someone who can understand Kiryu and his struggles, and this is shown most in his vocal performance around her. He speaks in a much softer tone compared to his usual self. This nice conversation is cut short when their van is being attacked by an 18-wheeler flatbed carrying Jinwoo Mafia goons. Thankfully, we do not have to do another terrible shooting section like we did in Yakuza 1. Instead, we jump out of the van and beat these dudes off the flatbed. Kiwami 2 added an especially brutal finisher to the Man in Black. The Jinwoo are waiting for us in town, so we have to fight our way to the Millennium Tower. Inside, Kurahashi has everyone tied up. When Sayama pulls out her gun, Date screams not to shoot as the whole room has been rigged to blow. Kurahashi reveals that he is one of the 2 survivors from the raid that night. When Sayama asks him why he wanted her present for this, it's because she has Jinwoo blood in her veins. Kawara shows up and yells that she is nothing like those monsters and to not associate her with them. Kawara has been following Kurahashi since he took that name 26 years ago. Date begs Kawara not to kill Kurahashi, which buys him enough time to spill the beans that Sayama is Kawara's daughter. This revelation causes enough confusion to allow Kurahashi to reach for his ankle pistol and shoots Kawara multiple times. Kiryu runs up and restrains him while he does his evil monologue, and then the boss fight starts. Kurahashi is another one of those characters that was remodeled in Kiwami 2. I don't really have any strong opinions one way or another, but I did like his original voice actor far more. His new face is incredibly smug and just screams "Heat move me" over and over again until I die, and oh boy am I more than happy to comply with that one. After we beat him, he tries to shoot at Sayama since nobody realized he still had his gun in his hand, but Kawara jumps in the way and takes the bullet for her, and then uses her gun to kill Kurahashi. Dying in her arms, her father, Jiro Kawara, finally reveals the truth of her past. After Kawara saved the boss's wife, they started living together and eventually had Sayama. They were a happy family, but Kawara took a job overseas in Hong Kong for a bit, and as we already know what happened thanks to Mirai, he ended up selling her out while Kawara was away overseas and she was killed. This is why Kawara became Killer Kawara, not only to avenge his wife, but also to make sure that Sayama's past did not exist, and that no one knew about it so she could live a normal life free of this crazy cult. His final words for her are to remember that the blood running through her veins isn't the Jinwoo's, but her mother's, kind, hardworking, and strong. When he was asked who was the child that escaped with them that night from the compound, he says he doesn't have the right to say who her son was that she gave away or where he is now, and with that, Kawara passes away. The florist decides that he and his boys are going back to purgatory. They work far better in the shadows rather than the sky. Date shows that he swiped the disc off of Kurahashi's body before forensics came to examine him. It's encrypted and the only person who can get it open is Sayama. We jump to Ryuji's perspective as he is mobilizing his army to Kamurocho, an ocean of black cars. He's ready to achieve something that even the great Jin Gota wasn't able to do. And despite barely seeing him since chapter 4, Takashima isn't worried that Ryuji will beat him to the punch, as Takashima still has his ace in the hole. Unfortunately, Sayama isn't able to crack into the disc on the laptop she has access to. The florist suggests using the system down in Osaka since she is going back with her mother to Sotembori. She agrees, but Kiryu notices she's acting kinda weird. And understandably so. You don't have your estranged father you've always wanted to meet die in your arms a few hours ago and be completely fine. He finds her drinking at the bar and eventually she starts to break down. She's scared to find anything else out about her past. For the first time in her life, she is really scared. And in the end, Kiryu was right. Knowing the truth only brought her more pain. It did not bring her the closure she had hoped to find. As she goes to leave, Kiryu stops her, kisses her, and embraces her, telling her everything is going to be okay, and that he is here for her. He asks her to promise him no matter what happens to come back to Kamurocho. With that, she leaves and we get a call from Date saying that Kazuki is finally woken up, but he is talking crazy, something about bombs. We head over to Imoto's clinic, and Kazuki reveals that for the past 6 months, he's been kept in a cage by the Jingwu Mafia, and the dude working at the club was somebody else. The most worrying thing he heard while being held captive was that they planned to destroy the city. They placed a bomb in town for each of their fallen comrades the night of the raid, meaning that there are 33 bombs in total. The first one was in the Millennium Tower attack at the start of the game. The second one was disarmed after dealing with Kurahashi. That leaves 31 active bombs somewhere out in the city. Date says he is going to call in the bomb squad and Kiryu has to go to Tojo HQ to prepare everybody for the Go-Ryu assault that is coming tonight. Kiryu updates them on the situation and tells them that Date and the police have the bombs covered. We just need to protect the city from the Go-Ryu's invasion. Yayoi remarks that most of the men are leaderless now, with the officers being assassinated thanks to Shindo. Daigo takes the initiative and tells Kashiwagi to rally all the men he can, coming out to roughly 300 soldiers. He will lead them. Since Shindo's betrayal, a real fire has been lit within Daigo. He is finally ready to be the leader that Kiryu believed he could be. We see his tattoo finally for the first time. It's Akala, the Buddhist deity. Fudo-myo, the Japanese worshipped version to be precise. A powerful vanquisher of evil and was regarded as the protector of the imperial court and the nation as a whole. Like how Daigo is becoming the protector of the Tojo, the man who will unite this dying clan and bring it back to its former glory. Kiryu and Daigo go to Purgatory to meet up with Date and are informed of the bad news. Unfortunately, the police don't seem to be taking the bomb threat tip seriously from a wanted murder suspect, and beyond that, the police will never act on anything without definitive proof, and all we have is Kazuki's word that these bombs exist. Kiryu tells Daigo to use the 300 Tojo men to deal with the bombs, and Kiryu will hold off the Go-Ryu clan alone. Sadly, the florist's surveillance system from the Millennium Tower was destroyed when Kurahashi took them hostage. It seems like we're all out of options until Majima shows up to lighten the mood. It turns out that Majima has been keeping Florist's old surveillance system well maintained, so now we have a way to locate all the bombs. As Kiryu leaves to let the Florist do his thing, Kiryu's cell phone starts to ring like crazy. He's getting calls from friends all over town. The Go-Ryu are attacking Bantam, the clinic, and Stardust, so it's up to Kiryu to run around town and save his friends as fast as he can, kinda like how he beat up the 3 color gangs in a single night from the first game. I love events like these, even if in reality they couldn't make the invasion as as climactic as it initially seemed based on the amount of cars approaching, but moments like these really build up the legend that is Kiryu. This dude is unstoppable. He's on a whole other level from everyone else. His feats are so insane that they sound fictional, but no, he really is beating all of these dudes and is being cool as fuck while doing it. But even Kiryu has his limits, and fighting everyone has left him all out of gas. Ryuji has the perfect opportunity to cut Kiryu down now, as he is completely exhausted and can't even stand anymore. But like Ryuji has already shown, the man has his honor, and a win like this would mean nothing. Killing a man while he can't even stand on his own 2 feet won't make Ryuji a dragon. Plus, Ryuji also wants them to deal with the bombs too. He plans to rule Kamurocho. What good would a city of ash be to him if all of the bombs went off? He leaves off with saying that once Kiryu finishes dealing with the bombs, that he will be waiting for him to settle things once and for all at the highest point in town. Now that the fighting is over, Kiryu and Yuya sit down and talk. Yuya is really frustrated with himself since he wasn't able to do anything to stop the Go-Ryu clan, but in reality, he held them off alone for so long to keep the place safe. Kiryu remarks how he and Kazuki work their asses off at Stardust every night. People like them is what keeps Kamurocho alive. Compared to them, Kiryu is only useful in moments like this, where your fists solve all of your problems. Daigo shows up and informs them that all but one bomb has been disarmed, and Majima is working on the last one as we speak. Sayama, back at the Osaka police headquarters, was able to use their computer to crack into the disk to find out what information was on it. We're now back to playing as Kiryu, who has headed back to Purgatory to meet up and celebrate disarming all of the bombs. Majima and his boys are going out to eat, and as he leaves, he tells Kiryu, "You better not fucking lose to that clown." The two of them still have a score to settle of their own. Date wants to talk to us about something a little later as he asks us to meet him back at the bar. In the meantime, we are going to do some quality bonding with Haruka as we run into some familiar faces again. It's the guy from the first game, and he is still a complete idiot and is clearly being taken advantage of. This woman is draining him of all of his money, and Kiryu decides to do some chaos maxing today and just gaslights the dude into thinking he is wrong. But I guess if he's happy in the end, that's all that matters. Date gives us a call that he is ready for us to meet back up with him. At the bar, Sudo is also there waiting for us. Before passing the disc off to Sayama, Date actually made a copy and had Sudo crack into it. The information on the disc reveals that Ryuji and Sayama are half-siblings, as they share the same mother. Ryuji was the child that was given up. They agree not to tell Sayama this information, and then Sayama immediately walks into the room and everyone scrambles to act natural. Both parties know the truth, but they are hiding this fact from each other. Sayama lies, saying that she wasn't able to find out what was on the disc, and when Kiryu says he is going to confront Ryuji and settle things, she tries everything she can to stop him, going as far as threatening to arrest him. Since she can't change his mind, she tells him that there is something she needs him to do first. She needs him to meet with Besho, who is at the Tokyo police headquarters right now. When the duo get to HQ and go to the room that Besho is supposedly waiting for them in, they find a laptop with a video recording on it. Sayama apologizes for sending them on this wild goose chase, but this was all just a diversion to keep them busy, as she was able to crack the disc and found out Ryuji is her brother. She is going to confront him alone and try to make him stop this stupid war. She tells Kiryu she cherishes the memories that they made in Osaka together, but sadly this is where their paths end, and they won't be making any more memories together. Sayama knew that she should have never let Kiryu into her heart, but the fact despite her best efforts, she still fell in love with him, which just goes to show how special Kiryu was to her. This is where the iconic meme desk slam comes from, which I have to say I like the sound from Kiwami 2 far more, as it is way more aggressive and sounds like my desk when I slam it after Premiere plugins stop working for the 80th time for no reason. We are finally here, Chapter 16, the final chapter. Like in Yakuza 1, now is the best time to tie up all of the loose ends. For these videos, I try to do all there is to do in these games, minus the checklist crap like eating all the food at stores, getting all the stuffed animals from the vending machines, and other crap like that that doesn't really matter. So to fight the Amon clan in this game, you have to go through quite a few hoops to do so. So many that I honestly felt like it wasn't worth it, since Joe Amon was the only fight of the 4 that I actually actually enjoyed. To fight the clan, you need to have learned every single move in the game, barring the one you learned from beating him. You need to perform every single heat move and finisher, barring the one from the final boss. You need to complete every sub-story other than the 2 shogi ones, the mahjong one and the patchy slot one that I mentioned earlier. You need to befriend all 10 hostesses, and you need to beat every single man in the arena at least once. This is so much, so esoteric, so time-consuming, so unnecessary, so ridiculous that I do not recommend the average person even to bother attempting this. It took me 54 fucking hours to do everything, but granted, at least a third if not more of that was being stuck on the golf minigame, the mahjong minigame, and stuck trying to get certain dudes to spawn in the arena. Speaking of the arena, it's honestly impressive just how many unique character models there are for this optional game mode. You have multiple tigers, dudes in gas masks, luchadors. The biggest drawback is that in order to fight Komaki, you need to fight and beat all 49 other fighters before he will spawn in the final challenge. It became such a chore for me as it took multiple hours to try and get some of these dudes to spawn for me. Even when doing the fights, they spawn in with the lowest pool of fighters, so I had the best odds. And as you reach the final stages, enemies require you to fight in really lame ways, and that issue I mentioned way earlier where heat builds super slow outside of weapons is really apparent. You need that heat so you can get sturdy and can't get knocked down as easily, but to safely do that, you just have to block with the iron wall technique so your guard can never be broken. I did find it satisfying to be practically forced to come up with some unique strats with dealing with specific characters. It's a lot of fun, it just could have been better if they cut down on the amount of tedium and RNG of trying to get certain guys to spawn on fights, because it often feels like a waste of time if you're not getting new opponents, especially after you finally get the one you've been looking for after spending forever to get them to spawn, only to lose and then have to try to meet them again. Of the 4 Amons, Kazuya is the most annoying in my opinion, because he is dual wielding the axes that were giving us trouble back in chapter 6 when we were fighting the Brazilian guy and when we encountered him in the arena. You fight him in such a narrow space it feels claustrophobic, and I just ended up cheesing him. At least in Kiwami 2 you fight him in the parking lot, which gives you far more space to dodge his bullshit. The only other thing of note that all 4 of the brothers now have is the shield ability, which greatly raises their defenses. Jiro just has RSA's move list from his boss fight in Yakuza 1, which Joamon also used in that game. Nothing really to say about him since he's just another boss that already exists. Sangoemon is by far the worst and most forgettable of the trio. The dude has a rocket launcher that didn't even manage to fire once at me. Pretty sure his AI broke for me and he just ended up pacing around the arena until I killed him. He was more of a punching bag than an actual fight. Joamon though makes up for all 3 of these lackluster fights by being absolutely insane. I love how his heat aura makes his punches look like they have trails of mini explosions following his fists. He has tons of phases, starting out with throwing grenades and then shooting you with pistols to whatever the fuck these things are supposed to be, to then dual wielding lightsabers. This fight rules, and with beating him we learn Komaki's ultimate technique. In Kiwami 2, you now have to fight him at the bottom of the Millennium Tower since, like I said earlier, they didn't make the dock location used in the first 2 games, which is where you fight him in the original. I think this fight sucks. He has less unique phases compared to the original, with less moves from the original, with the biggest thing of note that he deals a fuck billion amount of damage. Pretty much any of his combos once he goes into extreme heat mode will just one-shot you. It becomes one of those make a single mistake and you die kind of fights, and when the game's combat is wonky and inconsistent as it is, that's not going to lead to a fun time. You have to play pretty defensive, and because of the shield he gets and the insane amount of health he has, this fight becomes an utter slog. He has so many health bars that they ran out of colors to give him, so he just ended up having like 15 gray bars of health before you get to any of the colors. It seriously takes away any impact it had when you're just comboing him depleting bar after bar and all it is the same color. It feels like you're making zero progress. His ballerina spin move looks cool, but that's the only thing I can say positively about this version of the fight. Again, like I said at the start, doing everything to get to these fights is not worth your time. Please do not sour your experience of an amazing game trying to do these fights, but if you end up doing it, at least follow the guide linked in the description below. Now that we have done everything there is to see in Yakuza 2, it's time to face our destiny. We must fight our way to the Kamurocho Hills by going through groups of fights that fade in and out of black, teleporting us deeper and deeper into the city. Thanks to the Dragon Engine, we can see what was most likely originally envisioned with this sequence, as we have these fights throughout the town seamlessly, broken up by barricades that we could break down with our fists. Then we fight our way through the construction site, and we have our final rematch with the man in black in the elevator taking us to the top. Sayama has already beaten us there and is attempting to arrest Ryuji. She says she will turn herself in too, as she has been no clean cop since working with Kiryu, but no matter what, she wants to help him as a cop and as his sister. She doesn't want to see any more of her family die if she has the power to stop it. She reveals to him that his mother was still living alive under a new name. Chairman Gota confirms that she is saying the truth. 26 years ago, Chairman Gota met with their mother by chance at the bar and took them in. But when Jiro Kawara transferred to Osaka, she left to join him. Ryuji thinks that this meant his mother threw him away to start a new family, but it was actually Chairman Gota who begged her to let Ryuji stay with him, as he saw Ryuji as his own son. Ryuji just asks, "Why the fuck should I care about all of this now? My whole life I've been alone, thinking of nothing other than striving to surpass the great Jin Gota." While Ryuji does remember that night, he doesn't give a shit about the Jingwu, their code, or their revenge. All that matters to him now is that he becomes the best, and his final obstacle stands right in front of him. Kiryu says that Ryuji is the exact man he thought he was, a man who cannot change how he lives, a man who simply follows his gut. He says he reminds him of a friend of his, clearly referencing Nishiki, but more importantly, that is exactly who Kiryu is too. They even go an extra layer of kinography to mirror the shots leading to the Nishiki and Kiryu final fight from the first game. After we beat Ryuji, Chairman Gota thanks us. Thanks to Kiryu, he was finally able to hear how Ryuji truly felt. Because Chairman Gota hid what mattered to Ryuji most, his mother, it only drew them apart. He was always afraid that if Ryuji learned that his mother was still out there, that he would leave him, so he hid the truth. Chairman Gota tells Sayama to take him in along with Ryuji, since he is the leader of the clan, and it falls on him for Ryuji's actions up until now. But suddenly, a voice calls out from the shadows, a familiar voice. It's none other than Terrata. He reveals that he is the final survivor of the Jingwu massacre, and everything up until now has been all a part of his plan. From faking his own death to having Ryuji spark a coup due to the peace treaty he made Kiryu try and get signed. The one thing I've never really got about this scene is that during Terrata's explanation, he talks as if Ryuji is already dead, but he's just unconscious on the ground a few feet from him. Now all that's left is for him to kill Kiryu and the Tojo is finished, ending off with him setting off a bomb for Kurahashi's death. Kiryu has one question for Terrata. Were those words he said at Kazama's grave all lies? Kazama is the only reason he's alive here today, to even attempt to exact this revenge. When Terrata asks how he could have even possibly known that, Kiryu says it's because he was there that night, as we fade into a flashback of Kazama sparing Terrata and Kurahashi because they were young and Kiryu walks past them in the doorframe. Which makes it a little silly how both of them can clearly remember that night perfectly, but neither of them knew who the other was. How are you gonna tell me that Kiryu has been rocking the same fade for 38 years and you didn't realize that was him? Along with the Jingwu's whole thing being about exacting revenge, yet they didn't know who this kid was or even bothered to try and hunt him down. He was there that night. You didn't think he played some part into the massacre? Despite Terrata and the Jingwu continuing to gun for Kazama and trying to kill him, he still took care of them, going as far as to beg on his knees to Chairman Gota to take Terrata into his ranks and keep him safe. Kiryu asks Terrata again, after Kazama did all of this for you, you still try and do this, have you no sense of gratitude? Terrata says that he is Jingwu, which means that creed matters above all else. They are a group that has forsaken their humanity. He's afraid that Kiryu has to die here by their hands. The QTE for this fight is honestly really hard to land. I think I constantly failed it unless I happened to be mashing whatever button the prompt was, because the game accepts inputs before the prompt even appears on screen, making the QTEs in this game kinda jank. Of course, these guys are no match for Kiryu. As Kiryu is walking back to Sayama and the chairman, he is shot in the stomach, and out from the shadows comes Takashima. It turns out that he's been working with Terrata the whole time. He plans to destroy and absorb the Tojo, taking over the Omi, and conquering the entire Japanese underworld. Then once he has done that, he has his sights set on China and Korea. He shoots Chairman Gota to death, and now that Terrata has done all that Takashima needs for him to do, he is no longer any use to him, and shoots Terrata in the chest. With his dying breath, Terada tells Kiryu it's all up to him now. He is the only one who can stop all of this, and in the end, he needs to trust him. He pushes the red button on his remote and activates the bomb timer, leaving only 10 minutes for everyone to get a safe distance away. While Takashima is distracted by this, Sayama tries to attack him with a nightstick, but is put into a chokehold with a gun to her head. Out comes Ryuji to save the day, shooting Takashima for what feels like 20 times, while also getting shot twice himself. I love the final words he tells Takashima before shooting him in the head. A real man ought to be a little stupid. Scheming fucks like him can never make it to the top. It's the same reason that Nishiki could never reach the top either. He trusted no one and relied on no one, using underhanded tactics to climb his way to the top, while people like Kiryu carved their own path with their own ideology and inspired people along the way. If it wasn't already obvious enough, I absolutely love this fight. It is the second best fight in the series, only outdone by the final boss of Yakuza 5. Everything about this fight is amazing, from the build-up and the context, to the music, to the new intro and mid-fight cinematics in Kiwami 2, to the sound design. Ryuji is punching so hard, his fists sound like thunder, matching his lightning heat aura. holy shit, this music. Again, like with For Whose Sake in Yakuza 1, a scattered moment completely breaks the mold of the game's OST. Up until now, we've been bombarded with techno when fighting in Kamurocho, and fast-paced jazz songs like Outlaw's Lullaby and Sotembori. So to end the game off, we have an amazing piano ballad. This is how you end a fucking game. This is how you do a final boss. Words cannot convey how much I love this fight. By the time the fight is over, Sayama has made her way back up to us. She puts Ryuji in her arms and they have a nice last few moments together before he bleeds out. He talks about how she reminds him of their mother and tells her what their mother was like since she died before Sayama was old enough to retain memories. And that's the tragedy of life. If things were only slightly different, maybe they wouldn't have turned out this way. If the truth wasn't hidden from everybody, maybe their lives would have been different. Ryuji doesn't believe this, as he sees himself containing too much Jingwu blood that death would have found him one way or another. But I don't think so, given how he reacted to the fact that his mother was still alive. If only he knew this fact and met Sayama and Kiryu under better circumstances, they could have been allies. Kiryu at this point has lost too much blood and is now unable to move. So Sayama says that she is going to stay with him until the end. They kiss and embrace as the timer ticks down, both of them scared what will happen next. As the timer hits 0, the game cuts to black and the credits roll. This scene in the original has the second licensed song from Crazy Ken Band December 17th, which also didn't come back for Kiwami 2. So they just reused the Sim song from the boardwalk scene, and again, it doesn't fit at all. I seriously cannot understand why they didn't just go for something that was similar in tone at least, instead of going for a complete genre shift. But neither of the missing Crazy Ken Band songs are as bad as the credits. What the fuck is this shit? Who okayed this? This is embarrassing. It's terrible. It's cringe. The original ends with Silent Night because it's Christmas, and more importantly, the bomb doesn't go off. Silent Night is a public domain song. Why the fuck didn't they get it back for Kiwami 2? This is the most tonal whiplash for a credit sequence since the end of Wolfenstein: The New Colossus. I seriously can't understand how you missed the point of the scene for a game you already made. How does this happen? Thankfully, there is a mod for the PC that restores all of the music, and it's still amazing with the new visuals. We fade in from the credits to Haruka praying at a grave. It's a fake out, and Kiryu is still alive. This unfortunately has zero impact now to new people getting into the series because, of course, Kiryu is still alive. There's 10 other games of him still after this one. This is what Terada meant when he told Kiryu to trust him. The bomb was a fake out from the start. He removed the fuse prior to their confrontation, and it was the thing he dropped when shot by Takashima. This is Terada's true answer to Kiryu's question about Kazama. This does kind of bring into question why he did all of this in the most roundabout way and got himself killed in the end, which is, I guess, kind of a plot hole, but I like to think that he did this to free himself of the Jingwu curse and to free everyone of the Jingwu, breaking the passing down of generational trauma that is ruining the lives of people who weren't even alive when the original conflict began, yet are still being dragged in regardless. Of course, you could just say I'm extrapolating from nothing to make an excuse for a writing flaw of one of my favorite games, but this is my video and I do what I want. So as we have already covered, Yakuza 1 was a huge success and proved Nagoshi, Kikuchi, and the entire staff's ambition to be right. This could not have prepared them for the success that Yakuza 2 would be. In its first month alone, Yakuza 2 sold 500,000 copies. Yakuza 1 by comparison sold 300,000 in the first 6 months. As of 2012, Yakuza 2's lifetime sales surpassed 830,000 copies. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case in the West, as it only managed to sell a measly 40,000 copies, which I'm honestly impressed it even sold that much. I think the game was doomed to fail from the start in the West no matter what. It had every card stacked against it. Yakuza 1 was already a niche game with some pretty glaring flaws, so the sequel coming out 2 years later when it already had been out for 2 years in Japan, and the fact this was 2 years into the PlayStation 3's life cycle, there was no way this was going to be the hit it deserved to be, especially when being released alongside what would become mega hits of that year like Star Wars The Force Unleashed, which sold 5.7 million copies that year alone. When Sega was asked why they even bothered releasing it in the first place, they said it was for the fans. I want to read an excerpt from John Constantine's 1UP article that interviews the localization producer Kevin Frayne, because I think it perfectly puts the magic that is this series into words better than I could ever say. So if Yakuza can't succeed when Sega goes through the grand effort of localizing the game with English voice acting and altered content, but they also can't offer a complete, authentic, totally intact game because it's impossible to contextualize every element of it for a Western audience, why localize the game at all? Why bring Yakuza to the West when it's not for them? Because these are great games. They are worth localizing because they represent some of the only games still made internally by Sega in Japan. And they are full of the sort of immediate and addictive play that made the company a driving force behind the entire medium 25 years ago. They're worth bringing over because they're good, even if it's sometimes impossible to totally understand them. It's with this quote that I would like to propose an idea going forward. For the good and for the bad, through the highs and the lows, Yakuza is not a Sega franchise. Yakuza is Sega. By virtue of having these games and books, we can understand in some small part the triumphs and tragedies of one of the most beloved companies in the industry. I truly believe that Yakuza does not have a bad game in its series. There may be games that I think are not as good, and while I spent my entire video talking about why I thought Kiwami 2 was an inferior version to the original, and I will most likely never play it again after finishing this, I still think it has its redeeming qualities and is still worth playing for those who don't want to or can't play the original. Like I said at the end of my first video, I love this series from the bottom of my heart, faults and all. Just because I may dislike Kiwami 2 doesn't mean you have to as well, or that you and your opinions are invalid for liking it. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this video is that to play the series, it's one of the best video game franchises ever. Next time we'll be joining Nagoshi's team as they take their first brave step onto the 7th generation with their first mainline installment, that is Yakuza 3. I hope you look forward to my feature-length video where I will be explaining why I think this game is very good, and anyone who says otherwise and thinks that it should be skipped or remade got filtered. If you've made it this far into the video, I really want to say thank you for watching to this part. This is the longest it's ever taken me to work on a video yet. I started this back in November of 2021, and while I have taken breaks from this video to work on other smaller things, it has been a very long process to get to this point of release. So if you do like this video, please pass it around. It's all I could really ask. And if you really like the channel and these videos and you want to see more of them, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Videos like this take a very long time with a lot of research and a lot of work put into them, that in order to make these, I end up having to not be able to make smaller videos or other things that I possibly would want, which ends up hurting my revenue. Every patron gets access to videos a day early. I have a $7 tier that allows you to view incomplete rough cuts of videos. For example, patrons who are in this tier got to view the first 57 minutes of this video a few months ago. I'm now going to shout out all of my $5 and up patrons who really help support the channel. Bully, Akita Fishkiyama, Lucy the Fox, The Unthinkable, A, Bluntman, Elliot Morton, Jeff Ladd, Lotto, Nathan Redding, Nemphy, Quartz, Ruben Rodriguez, Samuel Egan, Sayan Heggie, Slemf Tingle, Walkman, Revin, Cosmonaut Cola, Rovit, Ben Johnson, Bergnut, Chichometrius, Dusty the Zombie, Ek Frazo, Filthy Fingers 69, Fishkami, Justin Collini, Kevin Velasquez, Nicholas Pedinato, Onion Girl, Starcasters, Some Panda, The FOE3, and William Moore. Thanks so much, guys. I want to thank Clemson, I'm on the edge of my seat, for doing a line read for this video, and I also want to thank all of my friends who gave input while I worked on this, especially my friend Bad Lad, who helped me write the final paragraph of the video because I was having a really difficult time trying to figure out how I wanted to close it out. As for what's next, I'm probably going to be sticking to small videos for the time being, since it took me so long to make this video that my analytics are really down and my revenue especially is really down, that it's kind of worrying. I really don't think I have the energy to do something big like this right away, even if I do really want to work on the Drakengard retrospective, Yakuza 3, Berserk, and so on. Those are the three main big videos that I want to do next. But for the time being, I'm probably going to talk about just PS2 action games and other random bullshit that is really interesting me at the time. If you're a card game player of any kind, I have a TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. Any purchases you make using my link will give me a small kickback. so it's just another way to help support the channel. I also have a NordVPN affiliate link if you want to try to get a VPN so you can browse the internet safely. Using my link will give you a discount on a 2-year plan, and I believe that's it. I honestly am struggling to do this outro because it's really early in the morning, as I ended up working throughout the night to get this finished so I could upload it. Whatever ends up coming out next, I hope you enjoy, and as always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.